Welcome to the Ask the Experts podcast. Here's Curran Bhatia.
And we're going to start off today's show on a more somber note. We know the passing of Patrick Day. He was a professional boxer at only 27 years old. He passed away, and that's actually why I wanted to do this episode. I wanted to do a deep dive into fighters' safety. We've had 4 high-profile deaths in boxing just this year alone, in 2019. And I wanted to try to figure out what can we do to make our sport safer. And I wanted to bring together a panel of guests, of experts, of people we could talk to, and just start that conversation and keep that conversation going of things we can do as fans, as people involved in the sports, as fighters themselves. How can we create changes so we do not have deaths in this sport? So, as I said, I wanted to put together a panel of experts, and I did that. It's a tough conversation, and a lot of the takeaways you'll hear involve research, education, and culture, right? Those are big things that need to change. And on this episode, I will be speaking with Bad Chad Dawson. He's a former light heavyweight champion. He fought the biggest names in the division. He's still fighting, but he is in older age for boxing. He's 37 years old. So he has a unique perspective in terms of someone who came up, was beating a lot of people in boxing, now has slowed down a little bit, and he also has a gym where he teaches young kids, and so he has a unique perspective about boxing and safety. After that, I'll be speaking to Dr. Nitin Sethi. He's a board-certified neurologist. He's the chief medical officer for the New York State Athletic Commission. He's the ringside doctor for the biggest fights in New York. And he's actually written a bunch of papers about how to make boxing safer. So we're going to talk to him about that. He is the expert in this field. After that, I will be speaking to Kevin Iole. He has been covering boxing and MMA for Yahoo Sports for many years. He wrote about Patrick Day. He's been writing about fighter safety and, of course, changing the culture, right? Changing that quitting culture. Us as fans saying someone quit. We need to not say that anymore, and I'm going to talk to him about that. Next, I'll be speaking to Ryan Songalia. He's a well-known journalist. He's written for Ring Magazine and many other publications. He reported on Patrick Day as well, and we're going to talk about fighter safety, about who Patrick Day was, and he's going to share some interesting stories there. Then I'll be talking to Alantez Fox. Alantez Fox actually was the first man to give Patrick Day a loss in the ring. He squared off with him in 2015, and he was the first person to beat Patrick Day. So I'm going to ask him what he remembers about his opponent, Patrick Day. And also, he's an active fighter. He's looking for fights. So what does he think about fighter safety? What can we do to make the sport better and get his perspective as an active fighter? Then, someone who just hung up the gloves, Seanie Monaghan, another fighter in the light heavyweight division. And Seanie actually knew Patrick Day since Patrick was 14 years old. They come from a similar community, and Seanie's going to share stories about Patrick Day. And it's interesting to note, Seanie just called it a career. He just retired, and he said he was thinking about making a comeback. Because of this news with Patrick Day, he has decided that it's done, full stop. He is fully retired. He's going to give us his thoughts on fighter safety. Then I'll be talking to Gabe Oppenheim. He's a journalist for many well-known publications, and he actually has some ideas about how we can get some funding and money for research, right? Research and education is going to be paramount in terms of fixing this sport and eliminating, or at least bringing down, these terrible tragedies. And he has some ideas of how we can kind of funnel money to bring funds, much needed funds, to the research and education that we need. And finally, I'll be talking to Ricky Alphonse. Now, a lot of people are coming out with thoughts and prayers, and we all have these tragedies in our minds. But Ricky is actually working on technology to make our sport safer. He's working on wearable technology that can actually track fighters' punches. It can track if you're a fighter being hit in a professional fight. And we can look at that data, and we can compare it to how a fighter was before and after the fight. We can see how they're trending. And tracking these fighters will be very important in terms of how we're going to make this sport safer, right? We need to have these data points to do so, and Ricky has a plan. He's founded a company, and he has a plan to do that. So without further ado, let me get to my first guest. He was a light heavyweight champion for many years. He fought everyone in the division, beating Glenn Johnson, Antonio Tarver, squaring off with Bernard Hopkins and beating him. He's also been on the other side of it. He's had some high-profile losses against Andre Ward and Adonis Stevenson, and I think that gives him an even more unique perspective in terms of fighter safety. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Bad Chad Dawson. I am Curran Bhatia, and let's ask the experts. I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm speaking to Bad Chad Dawson. He's in the Connecticut Hall of Fame. He's a former light heavyweight champion. He fought everybody in the division, still active and just coming off a win over Denis Garachev. It was a unanimous decision. It was in your home state, Chad. So just tell me about your most recent fight. I'm sure that getting a unanimous decision and getting almost every round on every scorecard must have been rewarding for you.
Yeah. I think my whole situation is kind of rewarding, being that I was off for 2 years. I fought back in June and then to get another opportunity to fight again, last week. It's good. And then I think I needed the 2 years off. And I was definitely happy with the unanimous decision. You can't go wrong with that. I basically won every round, except for I think one judge gave him a round. But I mean, it was like I say, every fight. I would do something look different and look a little better. So I felt I was a little sharper than I was my last fight. So going into my next fight, we're hoping to build off that. So.
Absolutely. And after the Fanfara loss in 2017, you took about 2 years off. I know after the Stevenson knockout in 2013, you took a year off. So now that you're on a winning streak here, you're 2-0 in 2019. What's the plan for you? When do you hope to get back in the ring? And how many more fights do you want to have in your career? You're 37 years old now. So what's the plan for the rest of your career?
Of course, I'm 37 now. I'm not that 24-year-old, who won the world title against some of my dad, but it's just like, just gotta, from now on, I gotta be patient and make the right moves. Obviously, like if I'm 37, I'm not 30 or 28 anymore. So, I'm gonna take my time. I want to fight again before the year's out. I want to get hopefully. December, I can get another one in before the year's out. But ultimately, I want to, fight for another world title. And I think that'll really, really, I'll be able to call it quits after that, after winning another world title. But if I don't win another world title, I'm looking to, at least maybe 3 or 4 more times, get back in the ring. But, not till I'm 40. I want to be done by the time I'm 40. So
you want to hang up the gloves by the time you're 40. So that would give about a couple year window for you to get some big fights. And I personally would love to see you match up with some of the top guys in the light heavyweight division. And I want to ask you about those matchups. But before we do, obviously the boxing world is in mourning here. Patrick Day, we lost Patrick Day. He was 27 years old, only 27 years old. I wanted to talk to you about fighter safety. It's been in the news and it should be in the news because we obviously need to make changes in this sport, right? We can't have people passing away. That's the 4th fighter that we know of that's passed away this year. So
it's
just talk to me about
situation.
Exactly. So talk to me about Patrick Day. If you knew him, your thoughts on him, and then also just safety in our sport.
Yeah, I didn't know him. I never got a chance to meet him. But from just doing my research on him, after hearing about the passing, after seeing things on YouTube and everything, like he was a pretty humble guy, and a happy kid, like he was excited about boxing. Like he was excited to have somebody introduce him to boxing. That's what I got out of it. So, like he was a true warrior. So, and back to like what's going on. It's definitely, like dramatic. So we definitely got to do something to try to clean it up and make it safer for fighters. And being a fighter, I have my own insight on what the problem could be. What I think the problem could be, I think is the weight loss, losing so much weight and struggling to make the weight. And then you're draining yourself, and then you're going into a fight the next night and you're not yourself.
Right.
Your brain, you struggle to make weight. Every ounce of liquid out of your body from your brain, everything is so, and then you're not yourself and you don't realize it. And you're going into battle, you're going into the ring with another grown man, you're getting hit in the head. It's never good. So I think that's one of the problems that should be looked into. You should find a safer way for fighters to make weight. And, and I don't know, but it's definitely, it's dramatic to me. It's traumatizing to me. The families that are dealing with it. And I mean, even my wife, she doesn't want me to fight anymore, And when the Patrick Day situation happened, I thought about, maybe I shouldn't be fighting anymore because what's going on right now. But, I'm pretty sure they'll find a way if they figure it out and they'll find something to make it safer.
That's really great insight from you. And obviously you are one of the unique individuals who's stepped into a ring at the highest possible level. So you would know better than anyone else. And so I think you're definitely onto something with the weight cuts. I mean, it just in terms of overall health, it's probably not healthy to stuff yourself down and then gain 10, 15, 20 pounds overnight. Go ahead.
There's ways to do it. It's a safe way to do it, but I think a lot of fighters don't really study that part of the body of what boxing does to your body, or what most fighters don't study that part about it. You gotta put the right foods back into your body. You can't just go and stuff yourself and eat cheeseburgers and I'm saying this from experience. Like I know that's what when I was young, when I was 26, 27, that's what I would do. I would, after the weigh-in, I would go eat a burger, fries. I would eat all the stuff I wanted to eat. But that didn't help me. It actually made things worse. So
right. Proper nutrition, rehydrating the right way, maybe through some guidance, right? Someone working with these fighters.
Yeah, nutritionist. Somebody who knows. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And that goes back to making it safer for fighters. Fighters should know these things.
Right. The awareness, the knowledge, the research, and boxing in general, the commissions, everyone needs to help with that, supplying fighters with that, because obviously when you're a young fighter coming up, you may not know these things and you may not have the right people in your ear. So let me ask you this, just piggybacking off of what you said. Some people have called for same-day weigh-ins, to go back to same-day weigh-ins. Do you think that would be safer, or would that still be unsafe?
I don't think that'll be safer. I don't think that'll. Think about it. If you weigh in and even if you struggle to make weight and then you got to fight that day,
right?
There's no safety in that. That would probably be even worse.
Right.
At least after you weigh in that day, you get the rest and get some food, but that'd probably be worse. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they can try it, but I don't see how that would work. I don't see how it would help.
Right.
I mean, I don't see how
I think you're onto something in terms of how fighters rehydrate, and hopefully people who are in the medical industry can come in and help with that and find the right protocols. The other part of it I wanted to ask you, it's a tough question to ask, but you obviously opened up your gym in Connecticut, and that's great because you're teaching young kids, you're passing on knowledge. And it's always great to have a place, an outlet for younger people, because it keeps them out of trouble. They're in the gym, they're getting disciplined. They're learning, they're learning discipline. They're learning schedules and they're learning a regimented routine. But with this recent news, Patrick Day, he was a young kid. He had a big smile. He was energetic. Yeah. Does that give you any pause when you see a kid walk into the gym and say, obviously it's the worst case scenario, but something could happen, right? Does that give you any pause when these young kids come to the gym?
Not really, because I feel like if it's done the right way, like I try to explain to the parents all the time, like, look, boxing is boxing, but if they learn the right way, they'll be safe. It's all about learning the right way. It's not about just learning to fight, learning to go out there and beat the other person up. No, it's the right way to, I try to tell everybody, boxing is a hit and don't get hit sport. Boxing is literally like chess. Like I tell it to my son all the time, you got to be smart. It's not a sport where you go in there and you give it all and see how much you can take. That's not what boxing is about. That's not what I take boxing to be. I take boxing to be a thinking man's sport. That's what I think. That's what I think about when I think of boxing. It's a thinking man's sport. It's about positioning. It's about calculation, the speed calculation. How many punches can I get off before this? And it's about and that's what I think about when I think about boxing. It's a science. That's what I think about. So
absolutely.
That's why I say in that aspect, I don't. You got it.
No, I was going to say, just piggybacking off what you said, teaching kids to hit and not get hit, right? More emphasis on defense, right? Yes,
exactly. More emphasis on defense. But at the same time, yeah, they're going to get hit. And at the same time, there's going to be kids that are more dominant than they are. I went, as an amateur, I wasn't the greatest amateur. Nobody talked about me as an amateur. But, I stuck with it. I stuck with boxing. And also from boxing, I got the discipline. I still get up every morning at 6:45 every morning, no matter what. That's what time I get up. I'm up, and that's the stuff that I learned from boxing over the years. Just being up, being on time. I'm always on time. I eat the same breakfast every day. I eat the same, and those are things that you carry on for life. And that's what I tell the parents. It's not just about the boxing part. It's about the things that you get out of it.
100%. And a lot of these lessons that kids are getting from the gym, they may not turn pro, they may never fight on a high level, but at least they're learning these life lessons of having a routine, having some accountability, waking up early.
Life lessons.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think props to you for teaching these kids and giving your knowledge to these kids. I think that's great. Just to wrap it up in terms of fighter safety, right? So if you go to your box rec right now, it says suspended by Connecticut Department of Emergency Services until November 10th, right? And what that means is after a fight, commissions set a period of suspension because they are saying it's not safe to fight again so quickly. So Patrick Day, he fought in June and then he fought again in October. Do you think that that's something that they could increase? Like no matter what, win or lose, there should be longer periods of time where a fighter can't step in the ring. Do you think that is another thing that we could look at to help?
But you got to think about this. Fighters also have sparring sessions, right? So leading up to the fight, they're sparring maybe 70, 80 rounds a camp.
Right.
You don't know what type of abuse they're taking in camp. And most fighters, their pride is so tough. They won't even tell you when they're hurt or when something. They won't tell you. You know what I mean? So I can say that because, when I fought Andre Ward, trying to make that weight, every day after training, I would feel worse and worse. I would feel weaker and weaker. I'm not fast. I'm not thinking because the lower I got in weight, the more I noticed I wasn't myself. Right. I wasn't feeling strong. Leading all the way up into the fight, I didn't feel good, but I didn't want to just back out of the fight and say, I can't fight so I continued on with the fight. And that night, that could have been a terrible situation for me. And people don't know that because they weren't in that ring. And and people say I quit. No, I didn't quit. It was a one-sided fight at that point. I was taking unnecessary punches. I couldn't defend myself. And I looked at the ref and I told him, I said, nah, I'm done. I don't want to go in because I knew it was a possibility that he could have caught me with a punch that could have just ruined everything, could ruin my whole life because I could barely defend myself. So that's why I say I have experience on this because I've been there and I've done that. I've been in that situation where you're vulnerable, where you can't defend yourself. That's how Patrick Day looked in the fight. He looked like he couldn't defend himself. And I tell my kids all the time, that's the worst feeling when you're in the ring and you can't defend yourself. When you're so tired and so depleted and you can't defend yourself, that's the worst feeling. That's the worst thing that can happen to a fighter.
100%. And I know that you had to suck down to 168 pounds for that fight with Ward. You were campaigning at light heavyweight before that, so that was a change, right? Something you had done for so long, 175, and now you have to go down. So that can help. I want to say, I think I commend you for in that fight saying I'm done and saying enough's enough, because one of the things I've been saying that we can do as fans is not have that machismo culture, right? We should never say a fighter quit. If a fighter wants to stop fighting, we should congratulate them and say, good job of having that awareness. And we should promote that. We need to get rid of that culture of, you know, calling people quitters and saying they quit and things like that. When you fought, you know, you mentioned Ward, and also, of course, the Adonis Stevenson was a quick knockout, but you've also been in longer fights, 12-round fights, win or loss. So in terms of recovery, right? We're talking about safety. Mm-hmm. Is it harder to recover from a 1-round knockout, the way, you know, the Stevenson situation, or a longer 12-round fight where there was a lot of damage, like a Ward fight or others? What's harder to recover from?
Adonis Stevenson can punch, right? And I say I'm not gonna say that it was the recovery time from from just the overall fight, but for me, the recovery time from, he hit me pretty hard. I was pretty hurt. I mean, but at the same time, I was in Canada. Nobody even maybe cared if I was okay. But this is just boxing is just such a grueling sport. Like it's just crazy. But like after that fight, I was really he really caught me with a really good shot, and I think that's more the thing that set me back. Mm-hmm. You know, that's where my setback came from. Where I fought one time after that, and then I was off for like a year. Then I came back again, and you know, I think I was just out of there for a long time. Like I just think like I was really like that hurt. I'm serious. Right. Like that's why I try to tell people boxing is a grueling sport. Boxing, one punch could be it. One punch can change your whole life. I mean, 100%. And I say that from experience, and everything I'm telling you from experience. Like boxing, like I don't see I think they can make it safer for fighters, but I think it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a tough road.
It's gonna be a tough road, and I want to talk about some guys that you could get in the ring with going forward. But last question about safety. You know, looking at Patrick Day, like we said, he had a great smile. He was such a positive kid. He was a role model. When it's a tough question for me to ask, but when you see something like that, do you say, I don't know if I want to step in this ring again. I don't know if I want to do this anymore, because anything could happen on any given night. Obviously, you're going to fight in a more defensive way, like you said, but anything could happen in that ring. Does that make you pause at all when you see that?
Yeah, if I said it didn't, I would be lying, or I would just be a cold-hearted person. I mean, whenever it happens to anybody, you know, you gotta think because it could happen to you, it could happen to me. You know, I get in there and I risk my life, and we know the consequences, and now I notice my last 2 fights, you know, when you sign a contract and things for the fight, now the doctor, after you see the doctor lets you know that, so you're fully aware that what you're getting into, and you know that you're going in I heard that in my last 2 fights. I'm like, oh wow, they're really taking it seriously, but they're not.
Right.
So it
sounds like they're changing it from to protect themselves legally. They're saying the right words. Exactly. To your point, when you got knocked out by Stevenson, the medical attention and all that wasn't there the way it should have been. Right? It was more about celebrating.
No, nobody. Yeah, exactly. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. I mean,
that's a problem.
But that's another part. That's another part of that, of the safety people need. But my last 2 fights, one was at Foxwoods, one was at Harvard Convention Center. I mean, they check you pretty good after the fight. Now they check you after the fight. They do little checkups, ask you for a right, they check you and everything like that. But then at that time, when I was in Canada, so they really didn't. So nobody checked on me. Nobody made sure I was fine, and I was like, that's why I say fighters are so prideful and hold that tough demeanor that they don't want to show that they're hurt. You know,
right, 100%.
And exactly, and that's how I was.
So let's hope that countries can come together, commissions can come together, and have some set of protocols, so that no matter where you fight, it's the same set of medical protocols that are there to help fighters. Let's hope that happens. So looking back at your great career, I mean, you beat so many people in the light heavyweight division. You beat Glenn Johnson twice. You beat Antonio Tarver. You took out Bernard Hopkins. When you look back at your great career, I mean, what was the not that you're done by any means, but what was the highlight so far when you look back at your career?
The highlight of my career, I would say the highlight is between the time me beating Tomai Zadimak and beating Ward. I mean, I'm not Ward. Bernard. Hopkins, yeah, the second time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, in between that time, it was. I had a good time. You know, I had some tough fights. I had some pretty good fights. But like I said, right now I just feel like I feel like I'm not done. I feel like I could win one more world title. So I'm not calling it quits yet. But like I said, it's just all about, you know, being strategic, being smart, and picking the right fights. You know, and doing a lot more homework on my opponents. You know, so. I mean, 100%. I'm just gonna have fun with it.
Absolutely. And you know, is there a fight where someone you fought where you want a rematch? So obviously, we know the situation with Adonis Stevenson. We're talking about fighter safety, and he had the issue against Vosdik. He was in the hospital. He's luckily recovering now, which is great. But you know, for example, if you look at John Pascal, I know that was a loss that ended on a cut. He's still active. You're still active. Is that a rematch that you want to have at some point with John Pascal?
Oh, definitely. We talked. We talked a few months back. About 3 months, he was here in Connecticut training for a fight against Martin Brown. We sparred a few rounds. Yeah.
And when you look at the light heavyweight division now, Sergey Kovalev, Dmitry Bivol, Arthur Beterbiev, Vosdik, we mentioned. So any of these guys. Are those? Do you want to crack at any of those guys? How do you see the division right now?
Oh, it's tough. It's tough. If it wasn't, I'll be lying if I said it wasn't tough. But it's tough right now. But like I said, it's all about being smart, picking the right fights, and just trying to squeeze my way back in there with those guys. Definitely. I think definitely a fight with Pascal. No, I know. I think he just signed to fight Badu Jack. I think they're gonna fight.
Yep.
So,
and another
Marcus Brown is probably looking for an opponent. I mean, I thought he had a rematch clause with Pascal. But I don't know what's going on with that. But you know, I think, like I said, I just want to keep going on, progressing, getting better, and just picking the right fights. Next, I definitely want to take a step up, and I want to fight somebody that's in the top 15, top 10. You know, so I'm looking to get right back in. Hopefully by spring, I get another crack at the title.
100%. And you've been in this game for a long time. It's been about 18 years, and I think you've earned the right to get those opponents at this point in your career. So I hope those matchups happen for you. Just to preview one big light heavyweight fight, Sergey Kovalev is taking on Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah.
We talked about you sucking down in weight for Andre Ward. Canelo's now coming up 15 pounds, right? So if you just had to preview that fight for us, how do you think that weight shift will be for Canelo, and how do you think that fight will play out?
I think it'll going up in weight like that, the fight, one of the biggest punches in the division. I don't see it going good for Canelo. I mean, I don't see it. I just don't see how. I mean, he has the reach advantage, the height advantage, the strength advantage. He has every advantage. I mean, I know they say Kovalev can't take a body shot, and Canelo's a big body puncher, but he's been hit with body shots by guys way stronger than you. So I don't think that his punch. I just don't see how he can. I don't see it.
And safe to say that
he can stop.
Safe to say that whatever happens on that fight, would you want a crack at the winner, Canelo Kovalev? If
definitely. You know, Kovalev's a great fighter, but he's beatable. If Canelo beats Kovalev, I guess he would be a tough fight for me too. So yeah, I would definitely take either one. I would take either one. Yeah, I would take either one in that fight.
Let's hope that those big matchups come together. I think that your southpaw style and your overall, like you said, you like to hit and not get hit. I think that's going to be tough for anyone. So we said you had an 18-year career, been almost 2 decades in the game. Any final message to your fans, to your supporters, people who have been following you since the beginning? Any final word to your fans?
No, I'm back. This is my last run. Running for a world title. I know I'll get another world title. Then once I'm done with that, I can hang it up, and just look back at my career, just reminisce. But, to my fans, thanks for supporting me. I still got another 2 years in me, just keep looking out for me. I'll be here.
100%. And Bad Chad Dawson, I appreciate your honesty, your insight. You're able to speak about boxer safety in a very unique way. So I think if you can keep promoting the message that you're doing as someone who has the unique perspective of being in there, I think that's great. I think it's great that you're teaching young kids. Best of luck to you in the remaining steps in your career, and we'll be watching. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
That was Chad Dawson, former light heavyweight champion, providing a unique perspective. And you can tell that fighter safety is something that he is concerned about, that he cares about, and he had a really good perspective, especially the fact that he works with young kids in boxing gyms, right? So he's going to want to pass down these lessons of defense and protecting yourself at all times. Up next, I have someone who is probably the expert on this field. If you want to talk fighter safety, you have to talk to this man, and that is Dr. Nitin Sethi. He is the ringside physician for the biggest fights in New York, and he's actually written multiple papers about how to make fighting safer. And I think the biggest takeaway that you'll hear is we really need to change the culture in boxing as people who work in the sport, as fans. And Dr. Sethi has written about that, and he's going to speak about that extensively right now. So here's my conversation with Dr. Sethi. I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm speaking to Dr. Nitin Sethi. He's a board-certified neurologist. He's the chief medical officer of the New York State Athletic Commission. We've seen him ringside. He's working with fighters at all of the biggest fights. So, Dr. Sethi, thank you, first of all, for coming on the show. And we know that the reason we're talking is because we've had the recent death of Patrick Day, and we've had a string of fighter deaths this year, the fourth one that's been in the news. So you've written a paper recently. It said, "Can boxing be made safer?" I know you've written about this topic a lot, and you're very passionate about this topic. So let's just start with the basic question. Can boxing be made safer?
Well, Karan, thank you for inviting me to your show. And before I answer your question, I want to express my condolences to Patrick Day's family, his friends, and the entire boxing community. We lost one of our own, and the loss obviously hits very, very hard. I've seen Patrick a couple of times. He always came across as a very intelligent, respectful young man, and I was deeply saddened by his untimely demise. You asked me a good question, and like you said, I recently wrote an editorial about a month or 2 months ago, which appeared in the Association of Ringside Physicians Journal of Combat Sports Medicine. And the editorial was titled, "Can Boxing Be Made Safer?" And I'm very passionate about this topic. And if you read that editorial, first and foremost, what I highlighted was that boxing, there's no way boxing can be made 100% safe. That'll be foolish to say. And in fact, I kind of highlighted that every medical association at some point or the other has made a call to ban boxing. That includes the American Medical Association, the British Medical Association, the American Academy of Neurology, the American Academy of Pediatrics. And there's a reason why all these medical associations have made a call that boxing should be banned, because you can make the argument, which nobody can defend, that no amount of boxing is good for the brain. You certainly cannot say that boxing is good for the brain. You can obviously, the other arguments which are made, that boxing has brings so much and gives so much to people in their lives, building character, helping people out of poverty, giving young men and women direction in their lives. Those are all valid arguments, and I respect them. As you know, I box myself, and I always I find that boxing has changed me so much for the better. But you cannot make the argument, you cannot defend the argument that boxing is good for the brain. So with that, certainly things like, when you say things like, well, reduce the number of rounds instead of like 12 rounds, made it 10 rounds championship fights, or 2-minute rounds, or things like that. All those arguments can be made, but then somebody will counter that by saying, well, how does it make a difference between 1 round and 4 rounds? A boxer has fought between, one professional fight in his career versus 40 professional fights in their career. So you always have counter arguments to that. And what I always feel is that, in boxing, there are many contact sports. You have boxing, you have MMA. These are combat sports. Then you have other contact sports, like football is a contact sport.
Right.
But in boxing is a unique sport where even against MMA, whereas, in mixed martial arts, there are many ways to win. A lot of times the fight is entirely on the ground. It's a lot of wrestling, submissions by different holds. Boxing is a unique sport where every punch is thrown, at least every punch thrown at the head, is thrown with the idea of winning by causing a knockout. And a knockout is by nothing else than a concussion. So, how do you make a sport safer where the whole idea or the whole in professional boxing, the motive is you want to win by causing a knockout. And when you win by throwing a punch to the head, that's, every punch is thrown with the idea of causing a concussion. So very, very hard to make boxing completely safe. But I certainly believe that boxing can be made safer.
And that's what I want to ask you about, certain ways that we can do that in this sport. The one thing you wrote about recently is you said boxing can be made safer, but the culture needs to change, right? And you brought up a story. You said that you stopped a fight with about 30 seconds to go, and the corner of that fighter kind of cursed you out. They used the F word repeatedly, you said. But you did your job, right? And first of all, thank you for doing your job and keeping fighters safer. But I've been saying this for a long time. The culture has to change, at least from fans' perspective, from trainers' perspective, right? It should never be a bad thing if a fight gets stopped. So we'll talk about different regulations and things that can change. But do you think that that's point number one? As a collective, fans, spectators of the sport, and the fighters themselves and trainers need to change their perspective, and the culture needs to change, and we need to not be against fights getting stopped. We should want fights to get stopped. Well, it's my personal opinion that yes, the boxing can be made safer, but the culture needs to be changed. Like you mentioned, and I mentioned in my article, what happened to Roberto Duran when he said no mas. Where it was like, in boxing, the culture has become that you will never say no mas. You'll never quit. No matter what happens, the fighter's mentality is not to quit. That mentality, I work out in a gym, and I see that mentality is ingrained into the fighter's head right from the time they enter the gym. So you must understand this mentality exists throughout the whole sport of boxing. The trainers have it, the coaches have it, the boxers get it. The mentality is never quit. Now, while I respect that, I respect that immensely, that in the face of all odds, you don't quit. You get up, you dust yourself off, you continue. But as a neurologist, I also understand that this is not really a wise thing to do. I'll give you an example. You're walking down 23rd Street and you get assaulted on 6th Avenue. Somebody hits you on your head. You fall down, you get up, you brush yourself off, you make it across to 7th Avenue. On 7th Avenue, somebody again assaults you. You again get up, you brush yourself, you walk further. Now on 8th Avenue, you get assaulted again. This time you'll not be able to get up. So what I mean to say is that we all encounter, and boxers encounter sometimes when they step into the ring where the fight is not going their way. It's you're getting a lot of punches. Now, this may not be like in one round where there may be a flurry of all punches and the fight just suddenly turns. This might be over a period of different rounds, of first round, second round, third round, fourth round. At some point in time, the mentality has to be that, and this is for the fans also. I feel that everybody expects either the fight should be like the fight of the century, or the way a boxing bout has to end is that somebody has to, in the end,
the fight has to go the distance, and somebody has to lose either by it goes to the judges, or by a knockout or TKO or something like that. Well, the mentality has to be where if you feel something at some point in time, you should say, hey, I'm not feeling well. And that's where, for example, the football culture has changed. Earlier on, the football culture was you get hit on the head, you shake it off, and you continue to play. Now the football culture has become, and that's the culture which is going into different sports, lacrosse, soccer. If you feel something, point it out to the athletic trainer, point it out to your coach, and let them check you out. There is no shame in doing that. So at some point in time, a boxer, because one thing I have to tell you, the initial signs of a traumatic brain injury, the initial signs of a concussion, are all subjective. I want your listeners to understand this. Subjective means that these are only the patient, only the boxer feels it. Like, for example, a subtle headache is starting. Now, if you and I are sitting ringside, I'm a physician, you obviously know the sport very well. You cannot feel somebody's headache unless the person tells you that the person says I'm having a headache. Somebody's a subjective feeling of being dizzy. It's a subjective feeling, as if you feel that you're slightly off balance. From a distance, the person looks to be steady, but internally the person feels dizzy. A little sensation of being lightheaded, a vision problem. I'm a little blurry in my eyes. Now, these are the signs where the first signs of a concussion, when your bell gets rung. Now, these are subjective signs. Now, if the boxer is not encouraged, if the corner is not encouraged to report that, at least report it to your corner. I'm having a headache. I don't feel so well. Something is going on. That should be the mentality where it should be encouraged to report these signs. And the culture has to change. I'm not taking away the fact of, quitting in boxing. Saying I'm hurt is not synonymous, I feel, saying I'm quitting. That's what has become, as if you quit. You're not quitting. We know when fighters quit. This is saying that, listen, I think I'm not well. Something may be off. Please check me out. We have to educate boxers, every trainer, every cornerman, every referee, every ringside physician, that the initial signs of a concussion, of a traumatic brain injury, are very, very, very subtle. And there should be an openness to let people know that I think I might be hurt, something might be wrong. I think my fighter is not looking good, or my fighter said, I'm having a headache. I think this culture comes by education about concussion. And I wrote in my article, first and foremost should be education. I strongly feel nobody in boxing should be licensed till they have some sort of a formal education in concussion. That includes the boxers, obviously, most important, the cornermen, cutmen, referees, doctors. There are certain doctors who may not know the initial signs of concussion. Ringside physicians come from different disciplines of medicine. We all need to make that effort there. We understand the initial subtle signs of a traumatic brain injury, and a willingness to share that information. I personally feel there's no harm in saying that. And that's the reason what I said, the culture needs to slightly change.
100%. And let's hope that culture does change with fighters at the top level all the way down to kids just walking into a boxing gym if they're training for the first time. Let's hope that culture can change and people can say, hey, if you feel hurt. I thought that was really interesting what you said. You don't have to just say, hey, I'm done. You can also say, hey, I'm feeling this. You can go talk to the doctor, right? That is available to you as a fighter. And I think you're right that that's not really spoken of a lot because of the culture. So the culture needs to change. So I think we're all in agreement of that. And I think education would be the biggest thing. And I think you're right. If there's some kind of course, some kind of material that fighters could look at, could be forced to look at before they turn professional or even before they turn amateur, I think that would be great, because I think with knowledge, I think there's really no downside of having more knowledge for fighters, especially if that can at least help the issues that we're having in the sport of fighters dying. And that is a huge problem. So we talked about the culture and yeah, sorry, go ahead.
If I may say so, this is like, for example, even when people step into a gym,
yeah,
like I have patients who will come to me people like you and me who are not professional boxers, we might box, may enter a boxing gym just for getting some exercise.
Sure.
They're not educated about concussion. They'll step into a ring and start sparring. And as you know, in sparring, when you spar, sometimes you spar and sometimes you get tagged. And they'll come to me with a concussion. The education needs to start right from the boxing gyms, right from the time they enter their training, while they are training, and that culture continues at the amateur level and the professional level. Like I said, I feel this is probably the single most thing which we can do, which will, I think, in the end, help to make boxing safer.
100%. Education is paramount, and let's hope that we can get more of it in this sport. So we've talked about culture, we've talked about education. At some point, and I take your point, I completely agree with it, that the goal of boxing, right, is to incapacitate your opponent, right? You want to put down your opponent, you want to win by knockout. Even if you win by decision, you're still doing so by most likely, punching a lot of shots to your opponent's head. You're hurting that person, right? And as long as boxing exists, that's going to be the goal, right? So that's not going to change. My question is, at some point, a group of people came together and they said, hey, 15-round championship fights are too brutal. It's not good for the fighters. We need to change it to 12, right? So someone looked at some kind of data and made that determination. So my question to you is there another step of, at this point in time in 2019, that people can come together and say, okay, now here's another regulation we need to check it, we need to make. And you've probably heard all of the ideas. We've talked about fighting with larger gloves. We've talked about changing the round amount, making it less rounds, headgear in the professional ranks. And I've actually heard that one both ways, that headgear can actually help. It can also hurt sometimes. It can hurt fighters thinking that they're not as hurt as they are. So that's another slippery slope. Weigh-ins, there's been a lot of talk about weigh-ins in terms of rehydration. Should weigh-ins be on the same day, right? And the list goes on and on. So let me ask you this. Let's start with the culture. Let's start with education. But what can we do in terms of the protocols of our sport to make it safer?
Sure, Curran. And before I dwell into that, I do want to make a disclosure that, as the Chief Medical Officer of the Boxing Commission for New York State Athletic Commission, the views I'm going to express now are my views. They do not necessarily are the views of the New York State Athletic Commission. That said, what I want to say is that, I've heard that, some writers have written the boxing, boxers, it's not unreasonable for somebody to die in the ring while they're boxing. That's the sport. But in the end, I find that slightly contradictory statement. I feel strongly no sport anybody should die. In the end, it's a sport. Okay, we all, sometimes meet a situation where things are not going according to our plan, and you come back the next day and you win or you do something better. So with that said, a lot of the things which you have mentioned, proposals have been done. I like to stick to some of the medical ones, because obviously some of the proposals which you say, like for example, like changing the scoring system of boxing, head shots should not be allowed. There should be only shots to the body. Now, or like wearing headgear. Now, as you know, these are decisions which are much above my pay grade and all. These are decisions which have to be made by the sports governing bodies, promoters coming together, commissions coming together, everybody who's a body to this, boxers, they need to come together to answer some of these things. But one of the main tenets against some of these proposals is that if you change the very nature, then fans will not watch it. So, for example, if you say there are no headshots now allowed in boxing, everything should be scored by body shots, that changes the very nature of the sport. Same thing about using headgears. So that obviously is the fact that you have to have proposals. Actually, as you step up, you need to have proposals which are practical, can be enforced relatively quickly. And then the more radical proposals, well, that all the people who are involved have to come together and decide whether any of these radical proposals can be done. For example, proposals like reducing the number of rounds in championship boxing, reducing the duration of rounds, things like 3 knockdown rules and other rules like should we make it mandatory, like if you have more than 2 knockdowns in a fight, the fight is stopped on medical grounds, or things like that. Now, these are all proposals which, as you can understand, they change the nature of the sport and they may not be accepted. So let's come to the medical proposals. So the medical proposals are, they are certainly, as you know, before a fight goes on, there's a lot which goes on behind the scenes, finding fighters who are equally matched, making sure these fighters are healthy going into the fight. That includes seeing what happened to them in the last fight. Was there an adequate period of, if, for example, the fighter lost, was there an adequate period of suspension before the fighter is coming back and fighting the next fight? Are they equally matched? On the day of the weigh-in physical, much before that, as you know, they send medicals. Now, the medical requirements, especially neurological medical requirements, vary from commission to commission. As you know, there are certain commissions where you need no neuroimaging before getting licensed to fight. So not a CAT scan, no MRI, nothing. There are commissions where an MRI is mandatory at the time of initial licensure, and then the MRI may be repeated after every 3 to 5 years. So there are proposals being made. Well, make the MRI mandatory at the time of initial licensure, and maybe think about doing MRI every year. Now, those are all good proposals, but even like a thing like doing MRI every year, people have to understand that yes, that will help in protecting the long-term health of the boxer. Because as they are fighting over their careers, we all are talking about acute neurological injuries in the ring. Think about what happens to these boxers after fighting 5-10 years. What's the chronic neurological insults? There's no light shed on them because by that time they're no longer in they're no longer in the spotlight. They get chronic headaches. They have chronic dizziness. They have problems with their memory. They have problems with balance. Parkinson's disease, chronic post-traumatic Parkinsonism can occur. So these are the good proposals, you're right, to protect the long. We owe it to protect not their health just in the ring. We owe it to protect their health when the boxing is over. So those are good proposals. But yeah, I feel, there should be very good, very strict evaluation of these boxers heading into the fight, how healthy they are they well hydrated? So that's all done leading up to the fight. At the time of the weigh-in physical, if they are not healthy, well, you cannot fight. You cannot come in dehydrated that time because you're trying to make weight, because the weight was so hard for you to, you signed up at a weight which is hard for you to make, and you signed up at the last moment. And then you are dehydrated because you're trying to make the weight, and then you rehydrate again. All those things, what they're doing, they're leading to a fighter who's already impaired as he or she's heading into the ring. We don't want them. We want them to be healthy heading into the ring. But then, so these imaging things are good, but then a lot I've said this and I've written a lot about that, a lot has to be done. Everything then boils down to the day of the fight, what happens in ringside in those rounds. We have to have very close observation of these fighters as they're fighting. Stepping up and stopping the fight on a medical grounds, right, has to be done by the doctor. These are hard calls to make. I've talked a lot about a good medical stoppage. A good medical stoppage, as I see it, is a stoppage which I'll make for the right reason. For example, I made the stoppage because I felt the person is concussed. Fans will justifiably be upset if I make a stoppage for a small cut, which is not doing anything, which is not affecting the boxer adversely, not threatening his or her health. And they're rightly so. If I do that stoppage, I have to blame for that. So it has to be a stoppage done for the right indication at the right time. You want to stop the fight at the right time, neither too early, because you want to give the boxers, they have trained for this the entire life. This is their profession. This is their profession. This is what they do for a living. You want to give them, the opportunity to show their talent in the ring. So you don't want to stop it too early, but you certainly don't want to stop it too late. I tell people sometimes ask me, by the time you're flashing a light into somebody's eye, I keep telling them, by the time I flash a light into somebody's eyes, and if the pupils are unequal in size, it's too late. That time, the bleeding in the brain is already evolved. That time, all I can do, and all the doctors can do, all the commission can do, the inspectors can do, is we can help to get the boxer quickly into an ambulance and take him to a level 1 trauma center. But that boxer, even if the neurosurgeon saves his or her life, that boxer is never going to fight again. There's permanent brain damage which usually occurs. So ringside, we all have to do a better job in understanding that, sometimes you have to be very, very careful. And then post-fight, obviously post-fight is very important also. If there has been a battle, they have slugfest going on, what's your threshold as a doctor of imaging them? Do you send them for a CAT scan? You don't send them for a CAT scan. What suspension you give? How many days you say, no, I want you to be suspended now for 30 days minimum because I want you to rest. I want you to rest and heal the brain. Now, will they follow that? Will they say yes, and the next day or 2 days after that, they're back in the gym and sparring or training for the next fight? That again, education has to come in. That is a reason why the brain needs to rest after a fight, because you need the brain to heal. So a lot of these things which are the medical things which can be done. But the other things which you mentioned, they involve a bigger group of people who need to sit down and decide whether decisions are about number of rounds, how many minutes each round, whether they should be changed, headgear or not. Those are things, because they will change the very nature of boxing. And so I feel everybody has to be a party to that.
100%, and you obviously have a great expertise here. So thank you again for sharing that. And I think you're right in terms of the evaluations can be increased, and then also the protocol. So it's both. It's not just one or the other. So just to wrap it up here, your profession, what you do for a living, you evaluate, you save lives, and I'm just curious about working in boxing. We all love boxing. It's a combat sport. It's mano a mano. It's almost the purest form of competition, you could say, but it does lead to these unfortunate incidents of people getting injured, getting brain injuries, and in the worst case, people passing away, as we had with Patrick Day and others this year. So just to wrap it up, as just your thoughts, is it tough for you to do what you do, to be a doctor in the world of boxing and have to deal with, the violence that we see in this sport? Because it is hard, because we love this sport, right? We love the entertainment, and we love seeing these fighters. So has that been difficult for you in your career?
No, unlike a lot of doctors, like a lot of neurologists who are conflicted about boxing, I have never been conflicted about boxing. I appreciate boxing for what boxing is. I box, like I said, I've been boxing for many years myself, but I'm also very, very aware of the dangers of boxing. And I feel very strongly, and I'm very passionate about making boxing safer. I feel we owe it to these boxers. We owe it to their families. I tell everybody, I said, when these fighters are stepping into the ring, they are entrusting us. By us, I mean the doctors ringside, the inspectors ringside, the commission officials ringside, people like you who are knowledgeable about boxing, reporters. They are entrusting us with their most valuable possession, that is their health. We owe it to them that we protect their health. We owe it to them that we try to make the sport safer for them. And we would not be doing our job if we are not doing that. In the end, like they are doing their job, they step into the ring to do their job, which is to fight. It's very clear from a boxer's point of view. Like I said, it's like clear cut. There's only one mission. The mission is to win. Our mission is to make sure that we make it safer. And I strongly feel that the time to make boxing safer is now, not tomorrow. We have to get together and try to make boxing safer.
100%. We owe it to the fighters. We owe it to their families. We owe it to the sport to make it safer. We need to keep the conversation going. We need to make the changes. And Dr. Sethi, I want to thank you once again for your work and for your writing about this sport, continuing to push for changes in the sport to make it safer. And I want to thank you for your expertise and coming on the podcast and sharing that with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Curran. And it was a pleasure talking to you.
That was Dr. Nitin Sethi, an absolute expert in this field. And he has some great ideas about what we can do to make this sport safer. So let's hope that some of those happen. Up next, I'm talking to Kevin Iole. He's covered boxing and MMA for Yahoo Sports for many years. And one thing that he has a unique perspective on is the differences in terms of safety between boxing and MMA, right? That they're two different sports. They're handled differently, and there's actually a difference in terms of fighter deaths, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk to Kevin Iole about. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Kevin Iole. I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm lucky enough to be speaking to boxing journalist, MMA journalist, Yahoo Sports, Kevin Iole. So, Kevin, we obviously know about the tragic passing of Patrick Day. He was obviously beloved. He always had a smile on his face. You wrote the story about Patrick Day and his passing. So what can you tell us about who Patrick Day was as a man? Who was Patrick Day?
Anybody who knows Patrick Day would tell you that he was one of the great people in boxing. I mean, just a happy guy, a guy that really enjoyed life, who lived to be in service to others. And he was a guy that didn't have to fight. He had a college degree. He had skills that he could have used to make a living outside of fighting. But he said tragically at the final press conference that he ever attended that the reason that he fought was because he had a fighter's core. At his core, I'm a fighter, and this is what I love to do. A guy that really loved the sport, had a lot of talent for it. But more than that, I think everybody's going to remember Patrick as a wonderful human being.
Absolutely. And it wasn't a story, the prototypical boxing story that you hear is a fighter kind of fighting his way out of poverty. And that actually wasn't the case with Patrick Day. His mother was a translator for the UN. His father was a doctor. He boxed because he loved it. Right. And that just makes it all that more unfortunate. So when Patrick Day was kind of coming up the ranks, was he someone that was on your radar, or did he come in your radar a little bit more recently because of obviously of the tragedy that happened?
Well, more recently, based on fighting on some Lou DiBella shows, and had gotten to know him, as a fighter via that. He trained with Joe Higgins, who was one of the heroes of 9/11, who was a first responder and actually tragically had found his own brother's body in the rubble on 9/11. And so I got to know Patrick through those two connections, and felt like he was one of those fighters who, while probably wasn't a world championship level fighter, was going to be a guy that would be an addition to every card. He came to fight. He had some ability. He won far more than he lost. And you knew you were going to get action when Patrick fought.
Absolutely. And he always had a huge smile on his face. He was like a role model, right? People looked up to this guy. People said he was the type of guy that you wanted as your brother or your teammate, right? You wanted this guy around. So it just makes it that much more unfortunate. And one of the things you wrote about in your article is that fighters are owed a better education, right? There needs to be more education available, more resources available. And now the question is going to be, what can we do to make our sport safer? And there's going to be so many theories and ideas thrown out. There's glove sizes. There's changing how many rounds. There's headgear as a possibility, changing the weigh-in. So I'm sure with you've covered the sport for so long, I'm sure you've heard all these ideas. What do you think we can do to make the sport safer?
Well, I don't think any of those things are really, there's not one magic bullet answer that you can say, okay, if we implement this, it's going to be safe and fighters aren't going to die. The way this sport is, this tragedy is going to happen. But what we have to do is try to minimize it to a great degree. And the big problem, I think, is education. We have to educate the trainers and the fighters both about what goes on in the gym and the signs to look for in concussive behavior. And I don't think that boxing does a really good job of that. And I have covered ringside. I was at 7 matches where a fighter died, including one where the fighter fell through the ropes and fell on me. I was sitting right at the ring apron. And I think in many of those cases, Curran, one of the problems was that the fighters had been in wars in the gym, and that they probably suffered a subdural hematoma long before they ever got into the fight. And that is the problem, because we can monitor who they fight. We can make sure the matches are fair. Referees are there to protect them, but they're not there in the gyms. And some fighters train in their in a ring in their garage, and there's no way to really do that. So what we have to do is we have to educate the trainers and also the fighters themselves, and we have to let them know that, hey, it's okay to say I've had enough, and you don't have to always push through, and it's okay for a referee. As fans, we have to be educated, and we have to understand it's better to stop a fight one punch too early rather than one punch too late. And that's why I wrote a column on Yahoo Sports critical of Max Kellerman, because I felt like Max's comments about Alexander Vodzik the other night, and he said that he quit. And I think that that's a really loaded word and a bad connotation to give in light of the fact that 2 days before that fight, Patrick Day had passed away. And I was just trying to make the point in that column. I know Max loves boxing and he loves boxers. But I think, we have to make sure the public understands this, and that we can't have them giving referees crap when a referee stops the fight. But I think that the most important thing really is educating everybody on the warning signs.
100%. And I've been saying this for a long time. It's not just education, but it's the culture that needs to change. And
correct.
That starts, the top down. And that means kids who go into the gym, right? The culture needs to not be, none of that machismo, none of that, right. I don't want to quit. It should be, hey, if you're not feeling well, if you're feeling a headache coming on, if you're getting hurt in this fight, you need to quit. And that needs to be done by trainers, by coaches. That needs to be done by everyone, and fans included, especially. We can't get on people for quitting, for not getting our money's worth. That needs to no longer exist in our sport. And I completely understand why you wrote that column. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is that you would have a unique perspective on is you cover boxing and you also cover MMA.
Right.
And I wanted to know your perspective. Do these type of tragedies, these deaths, do they happen as much in MMA as they do in boxing?
No, not even close. It's not there. There's never been a death in the UFC, which puts on more fights than anybody. And there's only been just a handful of deaths, and a lot of them were not head trauma deaths like you see in boxing. Almost all of the deaths are head trauma deaths. Somebody took repeated blows to the head, and they had an adverse reaction to that, and they passed away. And I think part of the reason for that in MMA, there's a number of reasons, but we mentioned quitting. Well, in boxing, quitting has a bad connotation. In MMA, tapping or giving a submission is just part of the sport, and so it's no problem. You can come back. But also the big difference is in boxing, if you and I are boxing, primarily the goal is I'm trying to hit you in the head and you're trying to hit me in the head. In MMA, you have wrestling, you have jujitsu, you have, many other things. And so while you may get, injuries like, knees and hips and broken ribs and elbows, you're not going to get the kind of traumatic injuries that you tend to get in boxing. When the brain and the human body's not built to take that kind of repeated punishment to the head. And the other thing that happens in MMA, a lot of people seem to think that you die from one big punch. And really what I have noticed over the years, and I think the experts will tell you, is that it's just repeated blows. And so if you fight a guy who's a hard puncher, but not hard enough to knock you out, and you take that for 10, 12 rounds, that's when you get in trouble. If you fight a guy like a Mike Tyson and he hits you with one shot and knocks you cold, you're generally out and you come back and you're fine. And so I think in MMA, you see they're wearing the smaller gloves. Actually, it's safer. They get knocked out when they get hit at a far higher rate. Fights are stopped, and they can come back after 6 or 8 weeks, and they're fine.
Absolutely. And there are differences in both sports. And I'm glad that you have the unique perspective on that. The other thing I wanted to ask you is I know you've been covering boxing for a long time. We've had 4 high profile deaths this year in boxing. And those are deaths that are kind of that are being reported. I'm sure there's deaths around the world in smaller boxing venues and areas that are also not being reported. But my question is the years that you've covered boxing, is the deaths consistent with how it's been for the many years that you've covered it, or is it more in 2019, or does it just kind of feel like more because, you know, we're coming off the recent tragedy of Patrick Day?
Yeah, I think this year is a little bit of an aberration, to be honest with you. Like, just fortunately for me, I haven't been ringside for a death since 2005. And I think that there have been some safety things that were implemented in light of 2005, where there was several high-profile deaths that year. And so that made boxing a bit safer. And now I think this year has been, you know, the Maxim Dadashev death was on ESPN, and Patrick's, of course, was on DAZN, and those were tragic. So I just think it's an aberration, though. I don't think it's as bad as it seems. You know, but one death is too many. One death ever is one death too many. And the fact that we've had 4, like you mentioned, is terrible. But I think that, you know, it's just a new phenomenon this year. And I think it's, you know, when you look at this sport, when you're taking blows to the head, and it's what happens in football, you know, you take these blows to the head, you're going to have some kind of reaction to it. Your body's not made for that. And what we hope to do is minimize it as best we can so that the fighters can take advantage of the sport and the sport doesn't take advantage of the fighters.
Absolutely agree. And just to kind of close it out, I wanted to ask you, and it's a tough question to ask, you know, when things like this happen, we love combat sports. We love watching these guys compete. It's, in my opinion, the purest form of competition, mano y mano. There's just 2 guys in there. Does it make you question at all the sports the sport that you cover and the sport that you love? Does it make you kind of take a step back and look at boxing in a different way?
You know, you wouldn't be human if you didn't. Like, I remember when Maxim Dadashev died earlier this year, and I said to myself, well, why am I covering this? My initial reaction was, why are you covering this shit? And I was really upset. And then I step back and I think of all the athletes who benefit from boxing, and over the years who have benefited from boxing. And, you know, the most high profile one, of course, would be Floyd Mayweather, who has, you know, made $750 million in the ring. And he was a guy that had nothing when he was born. And now he's got generational wealth. And I think that you see boxing has done so good for so many people. And the rate actually of death is lower than it is in other sports. Like, when you take people playing football, I think the rate of death in football is higher than it is in boxing. Now, that's not in the NFL, but that's covering high school football, college football, you know, any of that type of thing. And so, you know, I just think that while it kills me every time this happens and you lose a little piece of yourself inside, because you get to know these fighters and you respect what they're trying to do and you know about their journeys, like we know about Patrick and what he was doing. When you think about it in the bigger picture and you say, you know, Patrick would have wanted me to go on. Patrick would have wanted to see us continue to do this and let other people try to realize their dream. And so that's how I kind of rationalize it.
100%. You have to look at the fighters that made a life from boxing and got out of a tough situation. If you look at Canelo's arm, it says he has a tattoo. It says no boxing, no life, right? So right. He wouldn't have had a life without boxing. If you look at the Manny Pacquiao story, I mean, coming out of just extreme poverty to rising to global superstardom and now being able to give back to his community and help people, right? That wouldn't be possible without the sport of boxing. So you have to look at it that way also. So just to close it out, you know, we talked about different things that they could do in boxing in terms of protocols and overarching ideas and rule changes. But to close it out, would it be fair to say that your position is those things are important, but it all boils down to culture and education, right? Is that a final way to kind of sum it up?
I think that is the biggest takeaway. I mean, obviously, I think, you know, medical testing is going to improve, and there's going to be, you know, we got MRAs that we started giving in 2006 that we weren't given before, and that finds, you know, some vascular problems and that type of thing. And I think that medical science is going to advance, and we'll be able to detect things better than we do right now in the future. But I think it's always going to be down to education and culture. That is going to be the biggest thing that's going to help us.
Let's hope that the education increases. Let's hope as a culture, as fans, we can do our part, like we said, to not demand knockouts, to not demand you know, stoppages. We want fighters to quit when they need to quit, when they need to stop and they're not feeling well. We need them to do that, and we need to actually support and applaud that. So let's hope that happens. Kevin Iole, I want to thank you so much for your time, for your insight on this. Very much appreciated.
I appreciate you having me.
Thanks to Kevin Iole for taking the time there and his reporting on Patrick Day and talking about fighter safety. Up next, another journalist who reported on Patrick Day. He was actually able to share some really great stories about Patrick Day, and that is Ryan Songalia. He's a writer for Ring Magazine, and you've seen his work everywhere. So here's my conversation with Ryan Songalia. I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I am speaking with boxing journalist for Ring Magazine, Ryan Songalia. So Ryan, unfortunately, we just had the tragic passing of Patrick Day, and I wanted to talk to you about the article you wrote about Patrick Day, and of course I want to talk to you about boxing safety. But before we even get into what we can change about our sport, Patrick Day, we need to talk about who he was as a man and as a person. So how would you sum up Patrick Day? Who was Patrick Day?
You know, Patrick Day was a little bit unusual in a lot of ways because I remember when I first met him. He was 19 years old. He was fighting in the Golden Gloves and here in New York, and I was the Golden Gloves reporter for the New York Daily News. And a lot of the young amateurs, they didn't have that sort of charisma the way that he does. Like he had a sort of like there was a maturity to him, even though he was 19. Like there was a class to him. There was just a very classy guy, and he was someone who was easy to root for. Like I wrote about him a lot throughout his career in the pros, and I feel like even though he wasn't a champion or he wasn't the number one contender, you want to put good stuff out into the world too. You want to elevate too often in boxing. The bad stuff is elevated, and you kind of want to show, listen, there are good people out here. There are, inspiring stories. And he had an inspiring story. He was a person who came from a very good background, very well educated, as respectful and considerate as anyone you'd meet in boxing. And he had come from some adversity early in his career. He rose above that, beat a lot of guys he wasn't supposed to beat. There was something good about that story, and you want to embrace the good, I feel, in boxing. So that's kind of who he was. Like in a sport, in boxing, it's very common for people to not like anyone. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of negativity out there where, how do I say it? Like some people, it's all about them. They don't really care about other people. They will talk bad about other people. Even those people, even the people who didn't like anyone liked Patrick Day. He was that nice of a person. And, I think that's what kind of, a lot of times deaths in boxing, they happen a lot, and a lot of times people move on. And, but with Pat, it's hard to just say, well, that's part of boxing, because at the end of the day, Pat was different. Pat was the nicest person you'd ever want to meet. And I think that's why this loss has really resonated with so many people.
Absolutely. And I think also with the fact that it's been the fourth high-profile boxer to die this year, I'm sure there's more in other countries and other places that haven't been reported in the same way. You were talking about Patrick Day as the person. His mother was a translator for the UN. His dad was a doctor. He wasn't a story where a fighter coming from poverty trying to fight his way out. He actually chose to do boxing because he actually enjoyed it, right? And that makes it so much more, even more brutal that we lost this guy. Every interview that you see, he had a big smile on his face. He seemed like the type of guy that would be a role model to young kids. Is that the impression that you got, that kids kind of looked up to this guy because he had that big smile and that infectious personality?
Yeah, from day one, you know what I mean? Like, in boxing, especially here in New York, or I don't know if it's so unique to New York, but I find that it is in some ways. You get so many characters, you know what I mean? And Joe Higgins, his trainer, manager, his father figure, I remember him like talking to me about Pat and like in such like glowing terms, like he's like, yeah, I love this kid. He's got a great story. He's everything that's good about boxing. Like, he was, so enamored with this kid because he had that sort of aura. Everyone who he interacted with, I know it's easy to say now that, about someone who's passed, but it's so true. Everyone he interacted with really came away with a great impression of him. he loved boxing so much. He didn't have to box. He could have done anything. He could have been a senator. He could have been, you know what I mean? That's the kind of person he was. There was no dirt about him. He could have been anything if he wanted to be. He wanted to be a fighter. And, and I think that kind of hurts a lot of people. It's like he was a guy who loved boxing, and it was this thing. It's hard to walk away from, and then it's ultimately part of why it's why he's no longer with us.
And it is really, really tragic and unfortunate. So the question now becomes, what can we do in our sport to make it safer? Right? These kind of things can't happen, and we have to figure out what that is. So there's been a lot of different theories and a lot of different ideas being thrown around. People have talked about changing the glove sizes. People have talked about changing the weigh-in to the day of the fight. There's arguments if that's safer or not safer. There's arguments to giving fighters more time off between fights. So in this case, Patrick Day had fought in June, and then he fought again at the end of June, actually June 28th, and then he fought again in October 12th, which was his last fight. That might be a case of hindsight is 2020, but somewhere along the way, a group of people needs to come together and make changes. So back in the day, at some point, a group of people came together and said, we need to change boxing from 15 rounds to 12 rounds for championship fights. So I think that kind of thinking needs to come back. But if you had to kind of give us a guess or your best way of trying to make the sport safer, what would you say?
Here's the thing, it's, hindsight is 2020. And, we can sit here and say, well, if they would have stopped at one punch sooner, you know what I mean? They could do all that. But you know what? We don't know what would have happened afterwards. We don't know if if this boxer survived that night and then, they go on to fight another night and it happens that night. You know what I mean? It's really, I hate to say this, but boxing is boxing. It is what it is. And, there is this sort of, it kind of reminds me of I don't know if you're a Sopranos fan, but I'm a huge Sopranos fan. It almost reminds me of the last season of The Sopranos, where everyone is so desensitized to all the tragedy that at Bobby Bacala's funeral, they're all worried more about the food and less about a person, and there is this kind of, people like to look away from what boxing really is. But there are no routine fights. There are no safe fights. There's no that's just a tune-up or whatever. No, anyone at any time can get hit. They get behind the head. They can they can start to hemorrhage. People die in boxing. It is what it is, and people don't want to. I feel like there's an uncomfortability with a lot of fans and a lot of people involved in the sport that they don't want to acknowledge that what they're looking at is this thing. It's you're designed. The sport is designed to hurt people. And don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-boxing. I understand why it has a place in society, why it has all these great benefits to young people who don't have a positive outlet in their life. But we could talk all day about changing the glove sizes, the weigh-ins. It doesn't change what boxing is. It's always going to be about using your fists to subdue an opponent, and the brain isn't meant to do that. So I think that when Deontay Wilder, for instance, was talking about, I want to kill an opponent, people were very uncomfortable with that because it was another way to demonize a guy. They may not have liked him to begin with, but also it's it forced people to confront what boxing is, which is you're punching people in the head, and sometimes tragedies happen as a result. So I think that there's always going to be an inherent danger to boxing. I don't know if weigh-ins, that changing that, because people are going to find a way around that too. People will do something, we'll take that chance. I think that there is some encouraging talk. Actually, I think it's actually more instituted by a lot of the mixed martial arts companies, where they're talking about, you have to be at certain points in weight, and you can't lose this much weight, in such a time frame. I think that is important. But I think that as long as you have boxing, there's going to be tragedies.
There is, and I think you're right. I think commissions and oversight committees coming together and helping fighters learn more and say, hey, you have to rehydrate in the right way. You have to lose weight in the right way. You have to have your medicals in the right way. Like more knowledge, and somehow having the sport be less fragmented. Because even if you change the rules or you change the procedures, let's say you change it in a certain state or even a certain country, they don't necessarily have to adapt that in a different country or a different state, right? And I think that's one of the issues with boxing. It's such a fragmented sport. It's not like the NFL or NBA where there's one overseeing committee that's making all the rules. So I think that's one of the problems. You brought up an interesting point. You know, boxing is boxing, and it's not going to change. There's also an argument to be made that boxing also can help a lot of people, right? And the way that is people who maybe, we've always heard these kind of classic stories of kids who would be on the street saying, you know, I've interviewed so many boxers through the years. They say, if I didn't find boxing, I'd be in jail or dead, right? So boxing helps them be in the gym, be disciplined. And I actually heard you, I saw you tweeted about this today. You said, quote, heard someone scoff off the idea that boxing saves lives, made me realize that classism is still a thing. So, unquote. So I just wanted to have you kind of expand on that idea a little bit too.
Sure. No, I'd love to. You know, actually, I was in class, you know, and we were talking about the Patrick Day story, and someone shot off about, oh, that's problematic. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's, you know, like, I mean, when you come from a background where there are no positive outlets, and boxing is the one place where you can go and sort of let off your aggression and find a positive a male authority figure who's giving you positive reinforcement and saying nice things about you. I mean, that's not nothing, you know, that's everything, you know, and I mean that might kind of show my bias a bit because I come from that background and I understand what it is, you know, to be a troubled kid. And, you know, not saying that Patrick was troubled, he was not at all, but, you know, to be someone like that, you know, who doesn't have a lot of positive places to go. And then here's this boxing gym and, you know, you can kind of be somebody. I understand that. So I see that in a lot of places where if you're not involved in it, it's hard to understand, you know, what the fighters go through. There is this tendency to demonize them for doing the wrong, or demonize people for doing the wrong thing. And then when they do the right thing, you know, to demonize them as well. It really is classism. There is this elitist scoffing at boxing and other proletariat outlets that you'll see. But it's particularly with boxing, because these are, in many ways, I was explaining to someone recently about, you know, how this kind of involves it kind of informs my perspective on the world, you know, that boxing, you know, these are the most vulnerable in many cases and exploited athletes. You know, you're going out there and basically in shorts and getting punched and you're getting robbed every which way, you know, you have so many hands in your pockets. It's really that tough. So it kind of does inform my viewpoint of the world. And, you know, it's as much a labor issue as it is a class issue. So I have all the respect for boxers, and it does sort of upset me when I see people who kind of look down on boxing and don't realize that, you know, before they get to Madison Square Garden, before they get to Las Vegas and MGM Grand on pay-per-view on Showtime and Fox, they had to go through so much in their life to get to that point. That's why I say every boxer, I don't care if you're the world champion, I don't care if you're Floyd Mayweather, you are an underdog because you came from somewhere that you probably shouldn't have survived, and you did, and now you're thriving. You know what I mean? That's what boxing means to me. So I can't no one tell me anything bad about boxing and how it saves people.
Certainly. I mean, if you look at Canelo Alvarez, tattooed on him it says "No boxing, no life," saying that, you know, his entire life came from boxing. Obviously, we all know the great Manny Pacquiao story, coming from extreme poverty, rising to be a global superstar, and then being able to give back to his community to help the poor. Right? These are good stories that came out of boxing. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, we talked about what is possible in terms of commissions or regulations, and to your point is that whatever it is, people will try to get around it. But I think we both agree that research and knowledge will be helpful. I think in terms of what we can do as fans, right? And I've been saying this a lot. I think as fans, we need to have less kind of machismo in the sport. And what I mean by that is not tweeting things like, oh, that guy quit, or he gave up in that fight, or he should have gone out on his stool, right? We need to, if a fighter takes a knee or says I'm done, or a corner throws in a towel, I think we need to be, as fans, be much more accepting of that and not say, oh, I didn't get my money's worth in that fight, or that guy was only in it for the paycheck. Because at the end of the day, that fighter who has injury is going to have to live with that for the rest of their life, or in extreme cases like we're talking about with Patrick Day and others, they're going to have to deal with death, and their family's going to have to deal with that, right? So we as fans need to not be saying that. So I'm just curious about your thoughts as that what we can do as spectators of the sport.
It's it's kind of interesting the role of a spectator, because we watch DAZN or we watch ESPN Plus, and when these incidents happen, it's on live in the broadcast, and you know what? The broadcast is over, and then they play the outro music, and then you're thinking, okay, what am I going to watch next? Am I going to watch Netflix? Or, you have all these options, but, meanwhile, the fighter, is still dealing with this issue. They're like, for instance, Patrick Day, once the broadcast ended, that didn't mean, okay, well, show's over, and I'm going to, he was dealing with an issue that eventually killed him. I tweeted about this recently, actually. We were talking about fighters quitting, and I think that there has to be an evolution on how we look at fighters who do say, listen, I'm done here. You know what I mean? Because I think that there was always that the safety net was supposed to be the trainer. And I'll tell you something. There was Jeff Fennick, when he was working the corner of Mike Tyson against Kevin McBride, and Tyson gets back to the corner and he tells Fennick, listen, I'm done. Fennick goes out there and does one of the best things I've ever seen a trainer do. He acts like it's his suggestion. He says, no, Mike, you're staying on the stool. The fight's over. He took the blame. He took the heat in a way that a lot of other trainers, they may not have felt comfortable with. I've seen trainers force guys out of the corner. Oh, you're going to quit? I've seen them say that. And it drives me nuts because, listen, for a boxer to get into the ring, you've got to be a tough guy. I don't care, what the bar is set at, like Jake LaMotta or something like that. You know what? To get into the ring, you have to be a tough guy. And to be in front of all those people and to get to a point where you say, listen, I'm done, that takes a lot. That's not, a minor issue. That's a fighter reaching his limit and saying, listen, I'm hurt. I want to live to fight another day. I said something along the lines like, there is a limit to what the fighters owe us, the spectators. The fighters don't owe us their lives. They deserve to go back to their families just like we do.
100%. And I think you nailed it there, that not only as fans do we not have to have that mindset, but as trainers, right? And it's actually going to be tough for trainers because you need to walk that fine line of motivating your fighter, but then also not forcing them into harm's way and not having them continue when they shouldn't. So let's hope that the awareness for trainers after this can change as well in terms of their mindset when their fighters go into the ring. So just to wrap it up, Patrick Day, he was a great man, and you did the article about him. So was there anything when you wrote the article, anything new that you came across that surprised you, or any last memories or anything that you want to share about Patrick Day?
It's interesting because I knew a lot of people, they didn't feel comfortable talking yet, because we were still trying to see what was going to happen. We were all holding out hope. But unfortunately, the worst did happen. But it was, I was trying to find something that would surprise me, that someone would say, well, but there was this thing about him, but there isn't that thing, and it's, and to kind of, we know so many fighters who have, made that sacrifice, for so many things. And it's just, this one was the hardest one for, I think, a lot of people to move on, because there's that tendency, I think, in boxing to be like, well, this is what happens in boxing, and, he sacrificed his life. No, it's not that. it's hard to just kind of I think to say all those things that get us through boxing and the guilt of being involved in boxing and enjoying boxing, knowing what it does to people, and all of those same tropes, all of those same phrases that people say to get over it. This time, it's just so insufficient, and I think that's really what it is. That's what sticks about this incident. It wasn't just a fighter losing his life in the ring. It was this person who really was like, an exceptional person who, and it's just like kind of like that, why Pat? You know what I mean? Of all things, that was, I felt like a thing that a lot of people, like, they understood about boxing, that there are risks there, but, of all people to, that's why I wrote in that story. I said, boxing saves, but what happens when it takes someone who doesn't need saving? You know what I mean? That's that, which was a very controversial statement, in class today, which kind of upset me earlier. But, that's a true thing. It's, there are so many people who need boxing. The alternative to boxing would be something very bad. It would be in the streets. It would be but for Pat, it wasn't that way. And but he did benefit from the sport. I think that him having that relationship with Joe Higgins, who really was like a second father to him, and Joe Higgins was a guy who dealt with PTSD after 9/11, and Pat, that relationship helped him deal with it, and it kind of, I think, they were in this together, and the worst happened, and everyone's still trying to figure out why.
The article is Patrick Day Didn't Need to Be Saved. You can read it on Ring Magazine, Guardian, and other places. Ryan Songalia, thank you for writing about Patrick Day, for sharing your insights about him, and for chatting about what we can do to make the sport safer. Hopefully the conversation definitely does not stop here. Hopefully we can all continue the conversation about how to make our sport safer, because no one wants to see tragedies like this happen. Ryan Songalia, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having me.
That was the great Ryan Songalia breaking it down. So we've been talking to a couple journalists here and some experts in the field. One person who actually squared off in the ring against Patrick Day was Alantez Fox. They fought in 2015, and at the time, Patrick Day was actually 9-0-1, so he was undefeated. The fight went to a decision, but Alantez Fox beat Patrick Day, serving him up his first loss. So he obviously is going to have some thoughts about Patrick Day. He shared the ring with him. He's one of a handful of people to do that, to share the ring with Patrick Day. So I'm going to ask him what he remembers about Patrick Day. And also, he's trying to get a big fight right now, Alantez Fox is, right? He's trying to get these big names in the ring. He wants to continue his fighting career. How does fighter tragedies affect his mindset? And what does he think about how we can make the sport safer that he is actively competing in? Here's my conversation with Alantez Fox.
I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm talking to Alantez Fox. Alantez, I want to talk to you about what's next for you in your career and what fights you're looking forward to. But before we get into that, I just wanted to ask you about Patrick Day. We know that the tragedy that happened, he passed away. And you actually fought Patrick in 2015. He was undefeated at the time, and you served him his first loss. So I'm sure you're devastated by the news, as we all are. What do you remember about Patrick Day from when you fought him in 2015?
I mean, he was a first and foremost, I guess, rest in paradise to Patrick Day, and condolences to his family. But I mean, he was a very strong fighter. Yeah, he punched hard, man. He fought for. He was always coming forward. He was persistent. That was a big thing. I'm assuming that's how he was in life. They say he had his degrees. Yeah, 2 degrees, and associate degree and a bachelor's degree. So man, he was an incredible guy. We didn't really have, too many words besides good job with fighting and everything like that. But, he was, it seemed like to be a stand-up guy. My brother said he spoke to him a lot on Instagram, between fights and everything, and it's a devastating loss, man. It was really sad. It was really sad. I posted on Instagram and everything, but, it's tragic anytime we lose anybody like that. It's
it's heart-wrenching, honestly. It hit home pretty hard for me just because we had to share the ring together. But like I said, rest in paradise to him.
And like you said, he earned his a degree in nutrition, another degree in health and wellness. He didn't need to box. He did it because he loved the sport. When you guys fought, commonly after a fight, especially a close fight, your fight was a majority decision. One of the scorecards was a draw. Commonly after a fight, you kind of gain respect for your opponent, right? Afterwards, you kind of pounded out and you gain respect. Was that the case when you fought Patrick Day in 2015? Did you guys gain respect there?
Absolutely. Every time you step in the ring with somebody and you put it all on the line like that, you gain respect for that individual. When I posted on Instagram, I said, man, we're brothers just because we got to share the ring together. We sweat together. We bled together. And I may have come out on top, but it still was a hell of an experience.
I'm sure it was a good fight. It was a close fight on the scorecards. And rest in peace, Patrick Day, as you said. Now, when you hear this news, and now that everyone's talking about safety in boxing, and this is what you do for a living, you lace them up, you get in the ring, you're risking your life every time you get into the ring. What do you think about safety in boxing? What can we change about the sport to make it safer?
I think the biggest thing is the coaches. I think a lot of coaches neglect to teach defense. They teach, and my dad says this all the time, a lot of people learn how to hit, but not how to not get hit. You know what I'm saying? It's the sweet science. It's supposed to be hitting without getting hit. A lot of people don't learn how to do that. I don't think you could do anything more than what you do. It's a brutal sport. Like I said, we come in there to put our life on the line every time, it's a tragedy anytime something like that happens. But I don't know how much more safe it could be. It's us boxing. It's us throwing our hands at one another, hitting each other in the face and head, and this could happen. I think the doctors and everything, they were fast. They were immediate. They were in the ring immediately. They say it's just kind of a freak accident.
It was, and. To your point, at the end of the day, it is boxing, and the goal is to incapacitate your opponent, and that's always going to be the goal. There have been talks about, using bigger gloves, changing the weigh-in, changing rehydration, changing rounds. There's been a lot of suggestions. Do you think any changes like that are warranted for the sport?
When I speak on rehydration, honestly, I believe so. A lot of people talk about same-day weigh-ins, right? I believe more injuries or more head injuries would happen if we had same day weigh-ins, because people would not be able to hydrate properly. The last thing to go in your body is the fluid around your brain. So if you're unable to replenish that fluid around your brain, when you do get hit, it's your brain bouncing against your skull. You'll have way more concussions. It'll be a way worse thing. Changing rehydration. Telling people they can only gain with so much weight. I guess that could work. It would change the weight classes a lot of people fighting, I believe. But this is all, like I said, it's just part of the sport. We lose weight, we cut weight, we rehydrate, and we come back strong as we can. That's the name of the game nowadays.
Cutting weight and weight classes and things of that nature are always going to be part of the sport. When you first heard this news, you shared a ring with Patrick Day, so I'm sure it was even more worse for you to hear it. But did it make you pause at all and think about your career? You're 27 years old. You've started boxing in 2010. Did you pause at all and say, hey, maybe I need to kind of question what I'm doing here for a living?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. More people. I had more people call me and text me, saying, man, you got to be safe, be careful. A lot of people post it, because it's been a few deaths this year in the ring, and it's kind of rough. But I didn't question whether or not I wanted to do this at all. This is what I've been doing this for 19 years, man. And it's I don't plan on doing anything else. I don't plan on stopping. It just makes me say I need to be more defensively sound, get here as less as possible.
Absolutely, and I hope that those changes can kind of go down the ranks. Kids who are learning boxing, hopefully there can be more focus on defense. I've always said as fans, even as trainers, there needs to be less of the machismo culture, less of, you know, oh, that guy quit, saying things like that. We need to kind of get rid of that.
Absolutely.
So let's hope that in terms of a mindset, things can change. So let's talk about your career. Like we said, only 27 years old, in the prime of your career, only one loss to Demetrius Andrade. It was almost exactly 2 years ago. I was at that fight. So since your loss to Andrade, you're 2-0. Your last fight you won by knockout. So what is next for you in your career? What do you hope to achieve?
You know, I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to say. We have some big things in the working, but with this, we're taking a fight. We're in Puerto Rico right now. We're going to take a fight. I don't want to call it a tune-up fight. I just want to say it's a keep busy fight, a test to make sure that you still got it, you know. And I plan to pass this test right here, and then maybe in December, or I don't know, maybe later on this year we might have a title eliminator. And then after that, I plan on winning that, and then maybe early to mid 2020 fighting Demetrius Andrade for the belt again.
So if in your ideal world, you would want a rematch against Andrade. I heard that you had an injury early on in that fight. Is that why? And I'm sure that limited you. Is that why you would like a rematch against Andrade?
Absolutely. So let me explain the extent of my injuries. Sure. I think a lot of people still don't know. I not only tore my rotator cuff, I tore my labrum, which is the cartilage that holds your shoulder in place. I tore my bicep, and I tore a ligament in my elbow, all in my left arm. Now, it all didn't happen in the first round. The first round, I believe I just might have torn my labrum, and then that caused my rotator cuff to tear. And then, you know, as I kept fighting, or I kept trying to fight, I attempted to fight. If I look back at it, I feel like I attempted to fight there. I kept throwing that hand and injuring it more. So as it went down, the biceps probably tore, and then after the biceps tore, the ligament in my elbow probably tore right after that. And so I believe I definitely could have put up a much better, much bigger competition. I believe if I had a fully functioning arm, I'd be the world champion today.
So are you completely healthy now going forward?
Absolutely. I'm 100% healthy. I feel like I'm 150% healthy. And, you know, nobody goes in the ring at 100% all the time, but I do believe, you know, I'm where I need to be.
And right now it looks like you're ranked number 2 by the WBO at middleweight. You've listed 6'4", 6'5". Either way, it's extremely tall for a middleweight. So you give a lot of people trouble with your height and working the jab. There's so many names at middleweight. Obviously, Andrade, who you fought. There's Canelo. There's Golovkin. There's Charlo. It goes on and on. Are there any other fighters that you're kind of looking at that you'd hope to get a crack at?
You know, of course, I want to get all the belts. So I love to fight Triple G. I love to fight Canelo. I love to fight the Charlo, but you know, it's not just giving the problem. My height isn't just giving people problems. It's giving a lot of people fear. A lot of people say they won't fight me. I hear things like oh, he's too tall, or he's too awkward. I'm not sure what that means, but personally, it's, you know, if I was a shorter person, a height difference wouldn't stop me. And I don't. This is the thing. I don't believe it's the fighters themselves saying, "Oh, we don't want to fight that guy because he's tall." It's the handlers. It's the politics of boxing saying, "Man, there's no need to take that big of a risk against a guy like that who can actually fight and use his height well, because this would hurt our legacy." You know, and you know, we might not be able to make as much money and cash in. So, you know, somebody needs to get out of these other people's way.
Absolutely. And does that frustrate you at all? You know, it's pretty specific to boxing in terms of what you said. The handlers, the promoters can kind of create matchups, and people may want to avoid you because of that. You know, Paul Williams was also a tall fighter. He probably had issues in terms of getting the fights that he wanted. Does that, you know, or if you look at like a UFC where they can kind of force people to fight whoever they want to fight, does that frustrate you at all in terms of trying to get those big matchups?
It frustrates me endlessly. It's a tiresome thing. I fought back in May against Nick Munson. That was a last minute show up just because we couldn't get a fight. And then we had maybe 2 or 3 fights scheduled in between May and now that fell because of my height. And that's ridiculous to me. I do appreciate the UFC's willingness to make champions fight or make undefeated fighters or winning fighters fight other winning fighters instead of, handpicking and making them, making matches, padding people's record. I do appreciate that. I wish boxing was a little more like that. And I believe it was like that at one time. And I think maybe it will come back to that one day.
And have you ever thought about, if you can't get these matchups, would you ever consider moving up in weight and maybe trying your luck at higher weight classes? I've considered super middleweight. We've considered moving up. We actually considered moving up to fight Billy Joe Saunders, and I was turned down. So they said I was too awkward. We wanted to fight. Forgive me, I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Akhmedov, one of Triple G's prospects. Ali Akhmedov. There we go. And they said I was too tall, even coming up in weight class. And it was going to be on 4 weeks' notice. And so just to close it out, you're like we said, you're 27 years old. A lot of boxing left for you. So what would be your final message to the boxing world, to your fans and your supporters?
First and foremost, I want to say, don't let the hype stop the fight. That's ridiculous. I think that's a poor excuse for why you wouldn't stand in the ring with me. Send the contract. I'm willing to fight anybody. Secondly, for all my fans out there and people who aren't fans and I can make fans, just keep watching. We got big things coming up. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, @Alantez Fox, SOYAZAFOX. And I'll be posting things up, man. Just stay tuned. We got big things in the making.
We will stay tuned. Alantez Fox, best of luck to you. Best of luck in getting the matchups that you hope to get. Thank you for the time, and thank you for also helping us remember Patrick Day.
No, of course. Again, what's a paradise, Patrick Day, man, and condolences to his family. Incredible guy.
He certainly was an incredible guy. Alantez Fox, thank you so much for the time.
Oh, thank you.
Alantez Fox there breaking it down, telling us how we can make our sport safer and what's next for him in boxing. Up next, another fighter in the light heavyweight division this time. This is Seanie Monaghan. So Seanie actually knew Patrick Day since Patrick was 14 years old. So I'm going to talk to him about who Patrick Day was and continue the conversation I've been having about fighter safety. So here is Seanie Monaghan.
I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm speaking with Seanie Monaghan. He's a light heavyweight fighter. He's from Long Island. And Seanie, we all know the tragic news about Patrick Day. He passed away tragically. And I know that you actually knew Patrick Day since you were 14 years old. So what can you share with us about who Patrick Day was, the man that he was?
Patrick, I've known him since he was 14. I'm 10 years older than Patrick, 11 years older than him. But he's just literally the nicest gentleman of a kid you could ever meet. Any father would be proud to call him son. And he was a student of boxing. He was a hell of an athlete. He was a gentleman outside the ring, but a real tough, nasty kid inside the ring. And it's a horrible loss that's gonna haunt everybody who knew him personally for the rest of our lives.
It really is. It's very tragic. It's very upsetting to see a kid like that who always had a smile on his face. He was like a role model. And to see that happen is terrible. The other thing about it is, and you could probably speak about this knowing him growing up, he didn't have to box, right? This wasn't a story about someone who was fighting their way out of poverty, right? He chose to box because he loved the sport, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I keep on hearing that story, you know what I mean, that described that way. And, not every, a lot of guys don't have to box, but
yeah,
certain guys are drawn to it. Yeah, some guys are from really, really, from a real bad situation at home and stuff like that. And, but he was, believe me, he was just as down and dirty and tough when it got down to serious business inside that ring as anybody. So, I mean, yeah, he was a college-educated kid from a good family and everything like that. So I guess, he wasn't a typical kid, you could say, as far as boxing goes. But trust me, man, when that bell rang, he was a monster in that.
100%. And you're from Long Island. He's from Long Island. So in terms of the community aspect, was there a community following for him?
Yeah, well, we're from separate towns. I'm from Long Beach, and he's from Freeport, where the gym is. And he was a very, very popular kid in Freeport. And typically I would spar on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays early. And Pat, when he went pro after me, he started doing the same thing. But if for some reason we ever ended up having to spar in the evening when the gym was really, really crowded, he was like a different person altogether, man. He was not like just trying to work with you or anything like that. He would really try, because, we could open the garage doors up wide and it opened up to a big field, like a basketball court and stuff like that. And when we had an audience, he was a real problem in that.
100%. And so it's a tough question for me to ask, but, and of course, sorry for your loss as someone that you knew personally. But when you hear the news, you're 38 years old. You've been in a professional boxer since 2010. Did it make you question at all what you do for a living, knowing that you already knew this, but to have a loss near so close to you, did that make you question at all what you do for a living?
Well, I actually just retired about a month ago, too. So, believe me, I was counting my lucky stars that after 32 fights, I got out in one piece. I made both of my kids sleep in the bed with me that night and held them extra tight because, you never know. People, this is not the kind of, it's not really even a sport, boxing, man. It's something else. It's Mortal Kombat. People die in there and, people get damaged for life. And I mean, I've been at fight. I was sitting ringside for the Magomed fight where he got really, really badly hurt. And that was scary. And, every time you would hear about a boxer getting hurt, it would really scare you and really disturb you. But then to happen so close to home, it's still surreal. I mean, his wake is Friday and the funeral is Saturday. And that's not going to be easy, but it still in a way hasn't hit me. I mean, I wasn't with him there in Chicago, so I didn't get to see it happen. But it just seems like a weird dream that just won't end right now. A weird nightmare that won't end, really.
And I thank you for fighting all these years. You entertained us as fans. I was ringside for a lot of your fights, and you were always an entertaining and come forward fighter. And congratulations on retirement. So for someone who was in the game for as long as you were, now the discussion has become to what can we do to make our sport safer, if anything, right? And there's been so many different things thrown out. People have talked about changing the glove size, making less rounds, using headgear, changing the weigh-in, right? Goes on and on. You, as someone who's done it, right, who's actually laced up the gloves, gone through training camp, cut the weight, is there anything that you think that we can do to make our sport safer?
It's very hard, man. If guys put on headgear, no one's going to watch it. I think that will just be a nail in the coffin for the sport, really. The weigh-in's debatable. I mean, guys who used to do the same day weigh-in, some guys say it was hard to fight the same day. I think the theory was they moved it a day ahead to give guys more time to recover, but then the opposite happened where guys said, oh man, I've got all this extra time, now I could cut even more weight. And I know from personal experience that when I first started fighting, I was in shape at 185. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, how am I going to make 175? And I would get the 10 pounds off, but it wasn't easy. But then towards the end of my career, over 200 sometimes, losing 30 pounds for a fight. And, you go into that ring, you're not 100%, you're not yourself. So, I mean, but I'm sure, it's both guys doing it. So that kind of evens itself out. It's very hard to say. I mean, they do MRIs, they do CAT scans and stuff, but then they're good for like 3 years. So they don't do it every fight. You don't know what happens during sparring. There's a lot of variables. It's just a very, very dangerous thing to do. That's the bottom line. And I guess the more testing, the better. I was kind of against the next day weigh-in thing and all that stuff like that. Cause I was like, oh man, I don't want to do that. Just because I knew I had a big burden to lose all that weight, and I didn't want it to be any more difficult than it already was. But I don't know, man. Like I said, I'm of two minds about it right now, to be honest with you. I'm not sure what the answer is. I know that if it was the same day weigh-in, that I couldn't afford it 175 anymore. So, then maybe that would eliminate guys trying to cut that much. But who knows? Someone mentioned to me, what about weighing in 2 days before, which I would have loved that. But then, who knows? Maybe guys would be trying to lose even more weight. So I don't really have the answer yet. Believe me, I've been thinking about it ever since this happened. But I haven't come to a conclusion yet on that.
No, yeah, unfortunately, it is a slippery slope, because no matter what, people who are losing a bunch of weight, like you mentioned, you may be losing 30 pounds over a training camp and then regaining 10 to 20 pounds overnight, and then competing at a high level with someone else in front of you who's trying to incapacitate you, right? That's going to be tough. That's going to be unhealthy. And there's actually been issues with headgear as well, because there's been studies done that headgear kind of goes both ways. It could actually make it less safe, because people don't realize they're getting hurt as much. There's actually more mass on your head. So that's another debate as well. So there's a lot to be looked into with that. What do you think about the one thing I've been advocating for is a change in the culture? And I know that that's going to be really, really difficult to do. But what I mean by that is, as fans, us, not saying people are quitters, not saying a fight was stopped too early. And I think that extends to trainers with their own fighters. I think that extends to fighters trying to take away the shame of quitting a fight or ending a fight early. What do you think about trying to change that culture?
Well, I mean, this fight that we're talking about here, this wasn't like Mickey Ward or Toro Gotti type of fight. This is a good, competitive, high-level fight. And all the trouble just happened in the last round, really. He got wobbled with a shot. The kid chased him down, caught him another hard shot. It looks like he went down bad and hit his head. Maybe if he would have got hit a different way, he could have fallen forward and landed on his hands and knees, and it would have been all right. You never know. I mean, maybe he got hit hard in sparring and it knocked the screw loose, and then during the fight, the screw came all the way out. You really don't know, man. It's just a very, very dangerous thing to do. And, that's more of a fan type of thing. I would like to see the fans have some more respect instead of calling guys, this guy quit and this guy did that, this guy, it's really, really, to say it's brutal in there is an understatement, especially when you're already compromised. Like if you were 30 pounds lighter the day before, you're not going to be feeling your best. And you're in there with some killer, and it's just, I would like to see the fans pay some more respect to guys that call, the guy's a bum and this and that. He should have done this. He should have done that. Believe me, it's not that easy. And just to jump back real quick about your point with the headgear, that's one thing that I do disagree with, because I think, in my personal conspiracy theory opinion, I think they got rid of the headgear in the Olympic boxing because the ratings were low and no one was watching Olympic boxing. But there's absolutely no way that wearing headgear makes you less safe. Because if that's the case, guys would be sparring with no headgear all the time. It prevents cuts. It prevents. I think they said that it gives a bigger target, so guys get more concussions. I would strongly disagree with that, but I'm not a scientist. I'm just a guy who got punched in the head for 19 years, But in my opinion, headgear would definitely make it safer. But I don't want to really even, I haven't really watched boxing since last week, since it happened. But I don't want to see professionals fighting with headgear either at the same time. So part of the reason people love the sport is because it's so brutal. It's just the sad truth is horrible things happen from time to time, and this time it just happened to hit extremely close to home. So it's just shocking for me.
100%. And I think, no matter what the science says, the fact that you actually, laced up the gloves, you sparred, you went in there as a professional on the highest level. And if you say, you felt safer with headgear, then I'm more likely to take your word over a study or a test. So just to kind of wrap it up, you talked about your retirement. You had 32 pro fights. You were a professional for nearly a decade. So what's going to be next for you? Do you want to look into training? Do you want to look into commentating? What's next for you?
I'm going through a little phase right now where I'm just really, because I've still got a couple of fights, that I could have made some good money on. I kind of always wanted to fight Joe Smith again. And, so I was kind of on the fence. I jumped right into a job. I got offered a really nice job as a supervisor for a construction firm. So I jumped right into that like 2 or 3 weeks after my last fight, just because I knew I had to do something before the wheels started spinning again for boxing. But if they made me a really nice offer, I would have considered it. But now after this happened with Patrick, I'm definitely done. My wife would kill me if I told her I wanted to jump in there again now after this. Because, my whole family's been crying nonstop since it happened. So I couldn't put them through that again.
No, it definitely puts everything in perspective. I was going to ask you, if you ever had any regrets about anyone that you couldn't fight or anything like that. And obviously, Joe Smith, a battle of two tough guys from Long Island, it would have been something we want to see. But with the events recently with Patrick Day and other fighters passing away this year, it really puts everything in perspective, right? And it makes you realize what actually is important in life.
Yeah, because I was never I was never known for being a defensive wizard. So, I mean, to get out 32 fights, with all my health intact is a blessing. So, I mean, I don't want to push my luck any further. And, you just, like I said, it was a brutal reminder, a scary, scary, scary reminder of what I was involved in for all those years. And I'm not going to push it anymore.
Absolutely. So, Seanie Monaghan, first of all, I want to thank you for the time. Second, enjoy retirement. You've certainly earned it. Thank you for entertaining us for all these years. Best of luck to you in retirement, whatever you decide to do, and hope to chat with you again soon.
All right, my man. Thank you.
Seanie Monaghan there announcing his retirement, saying that the tragedy that happened with Patrick Day and other fighters have made him rethink that retirement and stick to it. There's no chance that he will be coming back into the boxing ring. As we know in boxing, fighters are notorious for coming out of retirement. That's not the case here for Seanie Monaghan. Up next, Gabe Oppenheim. So Gabe's an author, he's a journalist, and he's actually been tweeting about this issue a lot and saying that the people who are at the top of the sport, right, the people who are profiting from this sport really need to funnel some of that money towards research and education. Right? There's no reason not to increase funding for research and education, right? That's only going to make the sport safer. The more research, the better. So I'm going to talk to Gabe about how exactly we can do that. Here's my conversation with Gabe Oppenheim. I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm speaking to Gabe Oppenheim. He's a boxing journalist. He's a boxing author. You can see his work at gabeoppenheim.com. He's a contributor to many well-known publications. So, Gabe, I know you wrote about Patrick Day, as we all did in after this tragedy of Patrick Day tragically dying after his last fight. This is obviously a huge problem in the sport of boxing, and we'll talk about what we can do to try to make our sport better. But what did you learn about Patrick Day, the man, when you wrote about him?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I learned that Patrick Day, the man, was very much what he seemed to be on paper, which is often not the case with boxers. You see kids and they have these big smiles and they're putting their arms around other guys from the gym. And a lot of times they're not necessarily friends beyond the gym. But he seemingly really did befriend all the people around whom he worked in boxing. I just went and I wanted to see how far into the past I could go with newspaper archives. So Patrick passed away at 27, and maybe there's something earlier, but the earliest article I found was from 10 years ago, from when he was 17. It was a Newsday article, which makes sense because he's from Long Island, Freeport, Patrick Day is. And it was an article about all the people in the Freeport Police Athletic Gym who had done well in an amateur tournament. And Patrick Day was a smaller paragraph. The main paragraphs are about a totally different fighter whose first name is Kabir. And to be honest, I don't recall his last name. But I just decided, okay, well, let me put into Google this particular guy because he was an amateur fighter 10 years ago. I never really heard of him. And when I looked him up online, his Instagram account and several of his other personal accounts came up. And to make a long story short, this other fighter had not become a professional fighter like Patrick Day, but had become a Marine, a U.S. Marine. And he wrote in his own words, obviously in grief, but also, I think, in sincere appreciation about how Patrick Day and just the honest way he went about his work was a factor in him joining the Marines, which I didn't wind up writing about because one can only put in so many details, and that wound up just being a detail that I had on the side there. But it was kind of amazing. Like, I didn't expect the first article I found to be about this really great boxer, and the great boxer wasn't Patrick Day, not in this article anyway. And he seemingly was superior in a lot of different ways in terms of boxing, at least back then. And I don't know why exactly he decided to choose not boxing, although, safety, as we'll talk about, could have been a reason. But the fact that he became a Marine, that he and Patrick stayed in touch, that all this time later, he still credits this one guy, Patrick Day, with sort of the turns his life took in a good way, because I think he was very happy about having joined the service. That was amazing to me. Very few people have that kind of effect on other people. And look, let's be honest, if Patrick Day were a bad person, it would still be a huge tragedy that we lost him. But in this case, it seems like Patrick Day was a really good guy. And does that compound the tragedy and make it seem worse? Probably a little bit, to be honest. Yeah.
Every video of Patrick Day, he has a huge smile on his face. If you talk to people who knew him, they said he was the type of guy you wanted as a brother, as a friend. He was a role model, and I think people, young kids maybe did look up to him. So, like you said, I mean, it would have been a tragedy either way. We don't want people dying in our sport, but it makes it that much more hard when it's a 27-year-old kid with a huge smile who didn't have to do this. He could have done anything. And he chose to do this because he chose to do the boxing because he loved it. So I wanted to ask you, you tweeted out and you said the greatest tribute to Pat Day would be for our Barbaric Enterprises moneyed stakeholders to donate significant funds in his name. And I'll let you expand on that. But I wanted to know what I think it's good that we're being solutions based and that you're looking for ways that we can make this sport safer. So I wanted you to kind of expand on that point. What exactly would you like to see happen?
Well, first of all, I want to just explain a little bit why I tweeted that really briefly. I think it's really nice when people do quote unquote tributes to fallen fighters. But what I don't want is sort of what we get oftentimes in America in the wake of, let's say, a shooting tragedy, when lawmakers or someone who's a public figure says something along the lines of, we send our thoughts and prayers, but doesn't actually do anything regarding gun legislation. In a way, I view sometimes the reaction of the boxing world, and I say sometimes, and I'm really not singling any one person out. Twitter is this long stream of little notes that people send. Not every one should be taken as seriously as the other, but oftentimes, or at least recently, I've gotten the impression, and I think others also have, that it's very easy and therefore very common to see people say our hearts are with the family, our hearts are broken. And by the way, that's true, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with being truthful, but if the conversation ends there and we don't improve things, we are definitely condemning ourselves to keep repeating that awful fate. So the first part of the tweet is just simply other people are going to say really good stuff, really bad stuff, or really honest stuff about that moment. but there's a lot of people involved here. Tangentially, I kind of knew Patrick Day a little just because when I went a couple years ago to Tokyo to cover the fighter Ryota Murata, Patrick Day had been one of his sparring partners, and I heard a lot about him, but it was sort of secondarily. But he was promoted by Lou DiBella, and a lot of other New York people I knew him. So if it had just come down to me, I would have started with talking about the man. But because I knew other people were going to do that anyway, I really wanted to sort of skip that part just for now and let other people do the tributes and really look forward and see, okay, what can we do? So that's the idea behind it. As for what we can do, moneyed stakeholders, which is how I referred to people in my tweet, are most important just because scientific research is really expensive and neurological research maybe is not the most expensive, but definitely takes a lot of money. And that's partly why during his presidency, President Obama talked about donating or started, shifting so much federal money towards brain research because it's not an area of the body that we understand particularly well. We know a lot more about the heart, and we know a lot more about other organs. We know a lot more about cancer. And look, everything is bad and everything is good. It's really bad when things go wrong with any part of your body. It's really good when we have findings, but the brain, because it's obviously hidden behind this sort of hard skull, and because, to be honest, especially in light of what happened with the findings of CTE in football, it's not really, personally, I don't even want to find out more about all that can go wrong, but we'll be much better off if we do. We have to sort of confront that dark truth. So when I say moneyed stakeholders, I really mean promoters. Generally, they're the ones with money in this business, more so than boxing managers. And, with the exception of like Floyd Mayweather, let's just say, they have more money than boxers, certainly. And the other thing I mean by moneyed stakeholders are sanctioning bodies, which for a long time now, like 50 years really, although it's gotten a lot worse in the last, say, 35 years, have taken sanctioning fees from all sorts of fights with the idea that they confer legitimacy upon the fights. And promoters have got into this really terrible cycle with the sanctioning bodies where they think if we don't have some sort of title on the line, and TV channels also, if we don't have some sort of title on the line, then people won't be as interested. So we'll pay some percentage of our own monies, of the fighters' own monies, towards the WBA or the WBC or the IBF or the WBO. They'll say we're fighting for some kind of title, or they'll mess around with their rankings. So it seems like it's a number one challenger versus a number two challenger. And sure, we have to give them a little money, but in return, they will give us a little line on our poster and in our news release that will make it seem more important. So I think that's a terrible way to go about business, but we've been doing it for so long now that the sanctioning bodies, and they have these huge conferences every year. The WBA is Panama-based, so everyone goes to Panama. The WBC is Mexico-based, so everyone goes to Mexico. But it's quite obvious that they also have big money, more so again than boxers do. And so the idea was, okay, we need brain research. I have a few ideas of where I want to look for that, what I want to examine personally as someone who's looked at some neuroscience, but we need money. Because you have to entice research centers, you have to get people in and out, placebo people versus people trying stuff. I don't really know. There's probably a better way to sort of go about studies, but right now, it just takes manpower and technology, and so therefore money. Yeah. So I've been speaking for a while now, and I'll throw it back to you. I have some ideas, but before we can test anything, right, we're going to need people to commit funds. And I should just add one more thing, which is when I tweeted that out, plus maybe a couple other things, I was contacted by a couple promoters with whom I already have something of a relationship. And they said, don't worry, we're going to take care of Patrick Day's family with, future money from our operations in perpetuity. To which I say that is really honorable. And, if Patrick Day were someone who under my watch, and I guess he's really under all of boxing's watch, had gone down in this fashion, and he did, 100% the family should be supported with money. So it's not to the exclusion of supporting the family that I say, let's devote money to science. My response to the promoters was, that's a great step. Separately, for all the fighters who are still alive, if we have to be sadly blunt about it, we need money now for protection, for not the kind of racketeering protection that the sanctioning bodies always provide, but for the protection that comes from actually understanding what's going on inside a boxer's brain. So I'll stop there, and then we can keep going on the next one, because Lord knows, we both know I could talk for an hour and a half.
No. That's great stuff. And certainly we need to get beyond thoughts and prayers, right? And I think the fact that you at least gave a suggestion of how to do that, right? And there is money in boxing. It's going to different entities, and we know, it's a fragmented sport, and there's so many people with their hand in the cookie jar. But why not have some of that pie go towards science and education? And what I've been talking about for anyone who'll listen is we need to increase education, and we need to change the culture, right? And I think it's great that promoters are going to help Patrick Day's family, but I think if we can also put a lot of those funds into science and make some changes into our sport, that can help future fighters so that we can bring these deaths down. No one wants that, and we've had 4 big name deaths in our sport this year. And I've been making the point, like that's the deaths that have been publicized. I'm sure that there's boxing in different parts of the world, and I'm sure people have passed away that we don't know about. So the 4 deaths are in our face, especially Patrick Day. But this needs to be an issue that's top of mind for everyone in the boxing community. And I think it's good that you're trying to at least give one avenue of how we can at least try to make that our sport safer. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is the changes that can be made. And that may be this money goes into scientific research, and a group of people come together, and then they come out, they open the conference room door and say, hey, this is what you need to change. I wanted to ask, there's been so many ideas thrown around, and that includes, glove sizes, right? Increasing glove sizes. At some point years ago, a group of people came together and they said, fights are 15 rounds, and this is too brutal for fighters. We're going to change it to 12 for championship fights. There's been talks about headgear. There's been talks about changing the weigh-in from the day before to the day of, and then there's been a backlash to that, saying that could actually be more dangerous because you're making weight on the day you're fighting. So there's so many ideas out there. My question to you is, what idea do you think would make sense in terms of making our sport safer?
So yeah, that's a good point. The point should be made that neither one of us, really nobody right now, has the exact answer for what to do about solving things. But I also think we're overlooking really obvious stuff. So first of all, I personally don't want to see the weigh-in change to back the day of fights. I think that time for rehydration so that the cerebrospinal fluid can provide more of a cushion for the brain is important. So I'd like to keep it on the day before, and then just have a rehydration limit so we don't have, smaller guys rehydrating 30 pounds in water weight, because then obviously the night of there could be huge mismatches. So yeah, I'm in favor of more of like the IBF style 10-pound rehydration limit. I don't know if 10 pounds is exactly right, but we already have weigh-ins. A lot of people don't know this, right? We already have, for a lot of title fights, weigh-ins 30 days prior to the fight, and you have to make a certain mark 30 days prior. There's no reason why it has to be you make weight on a single day, and that's all that matters. It can be you make weight 30 days before and on the day before, and then on the day of, you also make the weight. And the weight on the day of can be enough so that you have room to rehydrate, but not so much that you have this tremendous sort of mismatch in power, or maybe it doesn't force guys to cut as drastically as they would have to in terms of weight. But that's not really something I've been focused on. That's sort of an obvious one, because if you think about it, we originally had it on the day of. We decided for medical reasons to change it. So that's already being focused on, and I'm not the last word on that. So it's good that that's being brought to our attention, but I'd like to bring a couple things to other people's attention. So first of all, we've had these high-profile incidents this past year, and like you said, there are probably many we don't even know about. But in terms of the high-profile ones, you had Adonis Stevenson, who I believe was 40 years old at the time, when he got brutally knocked out by Alexander Gvozdyk. And at the time, Adonis Stevenson was the light heavyweight champion for his belt, although he hadn't made a title defense officially against the mandatory in quite a while. But Adonis Stevenson went down with a hematoma. He had the tearing of vessels in the brain, the bleeding on the brain. He went to the hospital where they did emergency surgery, where they had to open his skull to relieve the bleeding, and they put him in a medically induced coma. And I'm sorry if that's graphic, but that is essentially the nature of the injuries we're talking about for all fighters. We're not talking about fighters pissing blood. If you get hit enough in the organs, you will urinate blood. That's really unfortunate, but it doesn't cause the death aspect, the brain not working aspect, the lack of oxygen to the brain aspect that we're really focused on here. So Adonis Stevenson had all of these terrible things, and he survived. And miraculously, if you look at videos of him now, you can see videos of him hitting the punching bag with more fluidity than I ever will. You can see him interacting with other people. He's still in the midst of doing rehab, but he is a survivor in a tremendous way. Has anyone else besides me, and I don't mean to put myself on a pedestal, but like anyone else said to since the Patrick Day tragedy, we should really go back to the case of Adonis Stevenson right now, see whether we can get, because obviously there are rules about privacy, but we need to get past that. See whether we can look at his medical records, talk to his doctors, and see what happened with him that enabled him to survive. Are we scanning his brain right now and putting the picture of his brain at the moment against the picture of some other scans that we have of boxers who unfortunately passed away? Because what happens is a boxer gets knocked out or unconscious. It's oftentimes broadcast in the last year, and it's been really revolting, as you know. Like you'll see a fighter just slump over in his corner, or in the case of Maxim Dadashev on the way back to the locker room. And sadly, in the case of Patrick Day, he didn't even leave the ring with consciousness at all, ever. He was knocked cold on the spot, and his head hit the canvas. And from that point onward, he never regained consciousness. But we have a case now, this past year, of a similar thing happening with a miraculous sort of recovery. Let's put up some scans of him versus these other guys, because that's what happens in the hospital. You get rushed there. They scan your brain as they're working on some other stuff. And let's see what we can learn from that alone. And that's only in the last few months, because these aren't separate things. And that's why one of the other things I want to do is say, hey, we have cases, sad as it may be, of people who have gone into coma but come out, like Adonis Stevenson, people who have gone into coma and never come out. But we have cases of subdural hematoma, of bleeding on the brain, and we have the fights that cause that, or several fights leading up to that caused that. Or age, because Patrick Day was 27, but Adonis Stevenson was 40. We don't have a huge sample size, but we have examples. Has anyone gone back and said, hey, let's look at CompuBox, let's look at the statistics from punches taken to see, is there a pattern here in the shots they've taken, the kinds of shots they've taken, and how much time it took for them to lose consciousness and what round? Are there patterns we can see? And what was really cool was CompuBox tweeted back and said something along the lines of, we want to help as much as we can. And the reason that organization is really important is because they can help us expand the sample size. We don't have statistics for a lot in boxing. We're not baseball. And thankfully, we have, even so, not a ton of deaths. But what we do have are records of every injury that has happened in a major fight. And almost every major fight for the last, 20 years, whether it's ESPN, Showtime, or HBO, or one of the newer telecasters, they've tracked punches very well. I mean, CompuBox gets argued about, but it's a good enough resource where we can start to say which punches are causing what and why. So that's a place to start. And again, it's to start. Like, we have to ask what's going on with Adonis Stevenson's brain right now as he recovers. We have to ask what's going on statistically with the punches guys are taking. And then there's stuff that we can ask, but we need money for answers. That it won't be apparent immediately. There's no chance of it immediately working, but we need to look. And so, for instance, there's a really great, interesting study that I cited when Maxim Dadashev died. I believe it was in the last couple years, but that is very recent and very important. If we were 20 years old, maybe it wouldn't be so significant. There was a study that showed that blood type influences your risk for suffering a subdural hematoma. Well, boxers have to give their blood for VADA testing, for HIV testing in the wake of Tommy Morrison, for all sorts of things. Telling someone's blood type is not a difficult thing. It requires no more invasive procedures than we already do. If you knew someone's blood type, you already know it's supposedly anyway. Are they at a little bit of a greater risk for subdural hematoma? And now, using that as sort of an idea, what else puts someone at risk? So, for instance, we take flashlights. We have neurologists and athletic commissions, and we shine flashlights in guys' eyes who are boxers before fights, during exams, and we want to see, hey, maybe you don't have a torn retina right now, but do you have something coming undone in your eye structure that may lead to a torn retina? Because if you do, and there are technical terms for this, they won't let you fight, or at the very least, they're not supposed to let you fight. We've seen guys, quote unquote, fake the eye test, and promoters pay off doctors maybe to let guys go. There's some dirty historical stories about that, right? But if we're just being clean about it, they're not supposed to let you fight if you've got these very serious risk factors for an imminent tear in the retina. Well, an imminent tear in the retina, when you fight, may lead to blindness, and that is really bad. But it's not as bad as death. So we need to find what part of a blood vessel in the brain right now indicates perhaps imminent tearing. And that means not using a flashlight into a guy's eyes. It means scanning the brain. But it really isn't as crazy science fiction as it might have been 10, 20, 50 years ago. You talk to neurologists who've seen enough people, not boxers, just people with bleeding on the brain, and you develop a framework for, hey, these are the risk factors for bleeding on the brain, and you know what that scan looks like. Now you compare that risk factor scan to a boxer scan, and maybe you can say this guy's closer to that happening than someone else. That's where the money comes in, because those studies haven't been done yet, but I think a template for them can be piled pretty quickly.
100%. So bottom line, money towards these type of scans so that we can start to see what people are vulnerable for, right? We're doing that on a level outside of the body, and we need to now do that for inside the body, in the brain, and we really need that to come to light. You mentioned CompuBox, and there are some great guys over there, and they said that they're ready, willing, and able to share any data. And so, like you said, let's take the data, let's see what we can find. Maybe we can't find a correlation, maybe we can, but it's worth trying. So let's get that started as well. So bottom line, if we can get more research, get more procedures, get more protocols, and continue this conversation, right? We need to try to continue this conversation because, as we've been saying, thoughts and prayers are not enough. So just to close it out, this was obviously shocking news, but we've had deaths in our sport before. So when you did get the news of Patrick Day, did it change your outlook at all in terms of the sport that you cover? We always knew it's a gruesome, violent sport, but this just hits home for so many reasons that we've been talking about. Did it make you change your outlook towards the sport of boxing?
No. I think I felt really, really sick to my stomach with Maxim Dadashev recently, and then I don't know, maybe I got all of my just disgust with the sport out then. And then with Patrick Day, I was a little bit more numb than I was disgusted, if you want to just talk about me personally. That's not great, right? Like, it's bad to have a death that makes you feel awful. And then when the next one comes, you're like, so you were already so sick that there's no more additional sort of sickness you can feel in relation to the sport. But what it did make me do was sending notes to all of my friends in the sport saying, how are you doing? Because tough guys are not tough guys, fellow fighters or promoters. A lot of people were revolted and were disgusted and felt culpable personally, even though everyone knows that boxing is dangerous. And so at least this most recent time, I was kind of numb, and I was more in the mindset of how can I tell other people we'll get through this together, which may not mean that we'll both be involved in boxing in a year, but you don't want people feeling that they have like a body on their soul. I know Deontay Wilder out loud says he wants that. I don't really know what he actually wants. I don't really think Deontay Wilder knows a lot about Deontay Wilder, but I do know that there are people who definitely don't want that, who felt very guilty. And it very well may be that this is a totally not worth saving endeavor. But in the meantime, the people who feel guilty about it, they are worth saving. Like I don't want to lose anybody anymore with relation to this sport. Not someone I know, not someone who's a friend of a friend, not someone who's Ryota Murata's sparring partner. So that's how I know him. So it just made me reach out to other people. And if I can just say one really other quick thing, in terms of stuff we can look at, so people don't feel like, first, I want people to not feel bad, so they're able to take care of themselves. And the tough thing is, see, this upcoming weekend, we've got the funeral of Patrick Day on the same day as this unbelievably interesting, intriguing 140-pound World Boxing Super Series final between Josh Taylor and Regis Prograis, which would have been such a bigger event in a lot of people's hearts and minds were it not for the tragedy to precede it. That kind of thing, I had someone call me, I think last weekend, and said something like, I don't know what to do. Every time I say something positive about this 140-pound awesome unification fight, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the honor and the memory of this other guy, which is a really tough spot to be in. I didn't have an answer for it. I just simply said, I totally hear that. Just keep talking to me. But what I don't want is for people to walk away from brain research and from, so that mixed emotion thing, I'm here for it all day long. And I will always support and console the people who need it if they come to me and that's what's going on. But I don't want people to have that in such an overwhelming way that they think, okay, well, this will never be fixed. Boxing probably won't ever be fixed. It will always be really, really violent. And I might walk away sooner than you or sooner than some of the people who seem like they're disgusted more so than me. But in the meantime, since we're all here, I want to say there are a lot of things that are so simple we don't consider them. So, for instance, I'm going to throw this out there really quickly. I've got a lot of stuff like this. People can always reach out to me and I will make the point and evangelize. It doesn't have to be through your podcast, although, again, I'm super honored you had me on. But, scientists for years have been trying to figure out why do people yawn. They don't really know. And one of the things they found at Princeton, because Princeton was sort of the locus for a while of yawn research, is yawns cool the brain, and the brain at certain points needs cooling. Well, when we put someone in a medically induced coma after they've taken these shots in a serious fight, once they've slumped and lost consciousness, the main goal is to cool the brain and enable repair. Now, you got people at Princeton who are all about cooling the brain and yawning and all this stuff. I doubt they've ever considered boxing as a field of research. And yet, it really is very much adjacent to what they already do. So I don't want anyone walking away because the science is too big. We went to the moon and we've done a lot of other stuff. I don't know. The moon's not even really my touchstone, but it is for older people. So we'll just go with that. We can do a lot of stuff in science to save this. On a philosophical level, if you don't want to save it, I hear you. But I wouldn't want anyone to walk away because there's no such thing as science. It will always be dangerous. I don't want to see headgear. It will always be a gladiator sport, and that's really kind of why I don't want to see headgear. But that doesn't mean that there aren't better things that we can do. And in the meantime, if anyone wants help, reach out to other people because I think we're all feeling more or less similarly. And thank you for having me.
Bottom line, the science is there. The scientists are there. We need to point the research towards our sport. And that's what you're talking about getting funding to bring these scientists to think about boxing in that way and have more testing, have more research, and change the sport in that way. And I think that is a good way to go about it. There's really no loss, no negative reason not to do that. There's no reason not to do that. These other ideas that we're talking about, people are worried that it could fundamentally change the sport, but if you're having more research about what's going on and tracking fighters' health in a more significant way, there's nothing wrong about that, and that should 100% be done. Gabe Oppenheim, thank you so much for your time, for trying to make the sport safer, for giving us tangible ideas and going beyond thoughts and prayers. If you want to reach out to Gabe, he's on Twitter at Gabe Oppenheim, or you can see his work at gabeoppenheim.com. Gabe, thank you so much for the time.
I appreciate it, Curran. Thank you for having me.
That was Gabe Oppenheim breaking it down, talking about fighter safety and giving us some tangible things that we can do to make the sport safer. We've spoken to a lot of people here, and my last guest is actually moving beyond the old thoughts and prayers, right? He's doing something actionable. He's founded a company called Advancing Technologies, and that's creating wearable devices so that we can track data, right? If we can track data, we can see how many punches are being thrown. We can see what fighters are getting hit with, the force, the speed, and if we can look at that and look at how it affects fighters, we can hope to make changes in our sport to make it safer. So here's my conversation with Ricky Alphonse, the founder of Advancing Technologies. I am Curran Bhatia. This is the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm speaking to Ricky Alphonse. Ricky is the CEO of Advancing Technologies. So Ricky, we've had these tragedies in boxing. We've had people die, 4 high-profile deaths this year. Most recently with Patrick Day, which was very tragic. And a lot of people are saying, thoughts and prayers. And we want to go beyond thoughts and prayers, right? And that's part of what you're working on. So what are you working on in terms of making the sport of boxing safer?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank you for having me on. I admire your work. And, we've kind of been working behind the scenes on this project for a little while now. And to be able to, this is my first time kind of revealing it to the world, and being able to reveal it on a platform like yours with so many respected people, people I look up to and admire, I appreciate it. So, it kind of sucks right now being a fan of the sport because, there's so many people taking shots at the sport at the moment saying that it needs to be banned. We worry about, the potential parent that has a kid that wants to be, to get into the fight game, being worried about the repercussions in light of, the Patrick Day situation, Maxim Dadashev, Hugo Santillan. And, even you think of the Adonis Stevenson situation. Thank God that was a situation he was able to come out of and live a healthy life again. But, we want to let them know that there's, hope on the horizon, that there are people working on solutions, and that we are out to protect these fighters. We love them, and we love watching them, and we love the sport in general. So that's, we're out to definitely protect them and let them know that there's no need to, worry about their safety in the future. So, one thing I kind of base my company around is Simon saying start with why. So, instead of telling people, this is the product, this is what it does, I like to actually kind of tell them why we're doing it. So, we want to enhance the sport by, we want to provide tangible data that helps athletes push past their self-perceived limitations. But we also want to allow them to perform at their best through the visualization of data. So in turn, we want to show the world the subtle beauty of the sport and prove through data that combat athletes are the greatest athletes in the world. Most important of all, we want to make sure that these fighters can live healthy and happy lives with their families long after their fighting days are over. So what we've been working on for the past couple of years is actually a non-intrusive and super comfortable, innovative wearable solution that ties to a combat sports analytics platform. So what we're doing is we're building a platform that utilizes machine learning along with our proprietary algorithms to create a user-specific profile for each fighter tied to the platform, giving the platform the ability to track one athlete or multiple athletes in the gym in real time. So over time, through repeated usage of the devices and the platform, this, begins to record and recognize the user's biometric signature, along with learning their movements, the way they move and block and throw punches and their stance and so forth. which we find is key because it can help fighters visualize and improve performance. But most importantly, it can alert of any health-related abnormalities and also help reduce the potential injury risk and ensure, a safer fighter.
And so I think it's excellent that you're working on something that could be used for anyone in the gym. You can track data, and that could be used all the way up to the professional level. So a couple more questions about that, though. What exactly is that going to entail? And in terms of what are you putting on these fighters' bodies? And is this something that a professional fighter could wear during a professional fight?
Definitely. And that's kind of the basis of the idea. So when we first had the vision for this product, it was basically a performance-based, tracker that would, track, the force and speed of movements. But, when I founded this company, it was, on the basis of wanting to create something cutting edge, to create something outside the box. So, when we had our aha moment, it led to us kind of scrapping the original idea that was kind of similar to, products that are out today for like soccer and football and basketball that aren't conducive to, fighting and, the impacts that these fighters have and, their bodies being hit in all different areas. So that led us to, develop something that was more flexible and had the ability to capture different forms of data. And it's actually perfect for combat athletes because this, not giving away too much, we're still in the patent phase right now and still, we have, we're on our second prototype, but we're still doing a lot of R&D on everything. But it's perfect because it mimics the materials that a fighter's used to using today. So it's completely hidden away from areas where it would be hit by, the athlete's opponent, as well as being able to, the certain form factor that we developed. It has the ability to have a close enough proximity to skin to provide clinical levels of biometric and health related data. So what was cool is when we had this aha moment and we started doing the research. We didn't see anything similar on the market for athletes, but what was being done on the clinical side of, and clinical and medical side, utilizing this same device form factor. So at that point we were kind of like, man, this, gives us a unique opportunity to provide not only, give athletes feedback on their performance, but man, we can give them something that tracks their health, something that they can bring, them and their team, their, the trainers, the strength and conditioning coaches, the athlete themselves, team doctors, even ringside physicians can analyze what's actually happened to these athletes' bodies as they're performing. So what was also really cool was, we began to think like, man, these devices, the way that we plan on developing them, the thinness of them, we can actually place these on the head and the base of the skull to get feedback on the rotational forces and the impact that they're receiving from the head to their head and neck. So what was really cool is that we actually were able to attend a conference. It was a neurocognitive seminar with some of the best neurocognitive experts from around the world. And we brought our idea to them. And one individual that we ran into, which was, I was super psyched about, was we ran into the father of the man that coined the term sports concussions, Dr. Jeffrey Barth. So he's the first man to actually begin saying, there's a problem in sports. He was looking at football at the time. There's a problem in sports. We need to start looking at concussions occurring in sports, because previous to that, they were looking at car accidents and things of that nature. And, we brought this idea to him, and come to find out a lot of the data points we were tracking, along with providing, the data on the rotational forces on the head and neck, it was leading to insights that these neurocognitive experts had not previously thought of or previously researched, and they thought it would be a very interesting research topic to get that data.
And at the end of the day, I think what I've learned in kind of doing this deep dive into fighter safety is research and education are key. And I think the more data that we can get, that's always going to be a good thing, right? That's always going to help make it safer. The more that we can track on athletes, especially in terms of health. But here's my question. And I think it's great that you're doing something in terms of a wearable or whatever tracking head, because I haven't seen that before. I've seen technology that you can put in a glove or in a wrap and it can measure the punch and the force, but I haven't seen it on the other end where when you're getting hit, it can measure that. So I think that's great. But here's my question in terms of adoption. How is the adoption going to work? Who is going to look at this data and say, okay, you got hit with X, and now this fight can no longer continue? How are those type of determinations going to be made down the road?
Well, I think a big key in kind of figuring that out, because, unfortunately in this sport, we have athletes that, it's the warrior mentality, which is, makes the sport beautiful. And that's why we love the sport. But there does need to be an education process. There needs to be a way for these athletes to kind of look and reflect on the information that's presented to them to figure out, maybe I need to sit out a little while and let my head clear, because the most dangerous thing for them obviously is returning too soon and receiving that second concussive blow, which could be fatal. So I think one of the keys is I'm not sure if you ever heard of the fighter study that's occurring, began in 2011 at the Lou Ruvo Center in Las Vegas. But they began studying, I think, around 500 different fighters. And so what they're currently doing is they're currently doing neurocognitive exams on these athletes prior to an event, and then comparing those results to the, after their fight, and seeing where they are and seeing if there's, their neurocognitive skills have diminished or anything like that. But I think also a big piece that's missing is, you have the, kind of the before and after, how they're behaving, but you don't have that other piece, the real-time data of what forces are impacting them. In turn, what we're able to do as well is, if you're tracking that other athlete, that their opponent, you're also seeing the amount of force that opponent is throwing and hitting that individual with. So I think if you compile all of those pieces together and you're able to kind of track these rotational forces on head through training camp all the way through a fight, and the research is done and these pieces are put together to kind of give a accurate picture of what's actually happening, I think then it could be something that could be implemented with the the athletic commissions and ringside doctors and things of that nature. But the research has to be done first. The data has to be, provided, and, there just has to be a database of analysis to provide to the user, to the commissions and so forth, to see what needs to be done to make these fighters safe. But it all starts with the collection of that data and analyzing it.
It does. It starts with getting the data. So basically you have one set of data, which is X, which is fighter A hit fighter B X number of times. Then you have the other side of it. Fighter B got hit Y number of times. So now you can look at X and Y, and then you can look at the neurological data from before and after and see how X and Y affected the neurological data, and then you can make a determination for future fights, right? So that's how you can kind of track it through time and then make determinations for fighters and say, hey, last time this fighter had this type of situation, it didn't end up well for them, and we want to get ahead of that. So let's it's a tough task because you have to get a lot of data. You have to have a lot of people looking at data, and you have to make people you have to kind of change the culture, which is a lot of what I've been talking about on this podcast about fighter safety. The culture can no longer be the warrior mentality. The culture can be, this is a sport, and we all want to end up at the end of the day, we all want to go back to our families and be safe. So let me ask you this. We tried something similar on a much smaller scale at HBO back in the day, and it was more about tracking just punch force and speed, and that involved a tracker that was on in the wraps, right? And the issue, one of the issues in terms of was the algorithms and all that, because that's tough to figure out, which is what you're working on, which is great. But one issue that we dealt with was the adoption, right? The adoption on the professional level, and what I mean by that is you're changing the way the sport has been done because you have some extra piece of equipment or device, even however small or whatever it is. It's something different, right? You're putting something different in there. And we know the sport of boxing is a very fragmented sport. There's so many different agencies and so many different entities making rules, and it's state by state and country by country. So how are you going to get adoption from this on a wide level? How are all the different commissions and countries, how are they all going to agree to allow you to do this?
I think that goes back to I think it goes back to providing that data. I mean, right now that, this with these 4 deaths, there's so much emphasis on figuring out a solution. I think once you present the data and they can, kind of see what is actually happening and how they can prevent it, you don't want the sport to decline. You don't want the viewership to decline. You don't want the participants to, there to be less participants in the sport. So I think that there's going to come a point, that they're going to have to look at this data that is being, from the Cleveland Clinic, Lou Ruvo Center, what my company is working on, and see that there are, there's a means to we're not necessarily changing the sport around, just making it safer. And, eventually it's going to come that point where they're going to have to listen to, the empirical data and see that there's a way to change these things. And I think it will take that, it's hopefully, I'm hoping it doesn't take more deaths or more tragic situations like recently the Patrick Day situation for them to realize that there are tools that can be utilized to help the sport. And, other sports are looking into this. Football has the helmets that are coming out. Soccer, they have the headbands that track the rotational forces. So I think it's just a matter of to get that adoption rate up. It's a matter of them seeing what is happening in other sports and not allowing our sport, the sport that we love, to fall behind all of these other sports.
Absolutely. And I feel like as fans, we need to have that public outcry and say, we want this for our sport. We need to at least try, right? We need to try these different types of things. It's not going to be perfect right away, but as we get more data, we can start to figure it out. So I think we need to have a public outcry for that. And I think in terms of adoption, we need to push that these overall agencies can funnel money for research and development to companies like yours and anyone else who wants to try to make our sport safer, because that's something we all want to see happen. So just to close it out, tell people where they can follow you, where they can learn about your journey, where they can learn more about the technology that you're working on.
So I in throughout this time of trying to work on this technology and build an amazing product, something that's super innovative, I haven't really too much focused on the marketing, social media. Like I said, we've kind of been working on this behind the scenes. But the one place you can find me and where you can eventually start seeing updates on the product, which we'll be delivering soon. Now that we're going into a new phase and our 3rd prototype. My Twitter is, and kind of the company Twitter for now until I develop one, is at advancing_tech. Instagram, like I said, I don't have much on there yet, but we're going to be rolling out some user testing, some photos of the product. But that handle is ricky.alphonse, and our Facebook probably has the most company-related content right now, which still isn't much at the moment, but that is We Are Advancing Technology. And also been working on a podcast as well. We'll also be delivering updates. Kind of took a break from that, but January we'll be picking that back up in. You can find that on Spotify, iTunes, Anchor.fm, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and other platforms. And that is the Art of Fighting podcast that I do with my co-host, Ronnie.
Excellent. Ricky, Alphonse, thank you so much for the time. And thank you for what you're doing to make our sport safer. No one wants to see these tragedies. And you're going beyond, like I said before, you're going beyond the thoughts and prayers, right? And you're making actionable, wearable technology that will eventually make our sport safer. So thank you for doing that.
No, definitely. I love these athletes. I love the sport, and don't want to see any more, tragedies like Patrick Day. We want to figure out, how, Muhammad Ali, had these issues after his fighting days when he had less fights and retired at an earlier age than George Foreman, who, fought longer into his life and also fought more fights. And, he's a accomplished businessman that doesn't seem to be suffering from those same effects. If we can kind of figure that out and close that gap, a lot of these fighters can live out happier, healthier lives with their families.
100%. If we can see these fighters retire and be their vibrant selves after their fighting career, that would be wonderful for everyone involved. Ricky, Alphonse, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for coming on the podcast. The company is Advancing Technologies. You can follow them on social media, and I hope to follow your journey and hope to have you again, have you on again soon, so we can continue to give people updates about what you're working on.
Definitely, I'll keep you posted, man. I definitely will.
All right, thanks so much for the time.
All right, you too. Have a good one.
And that brings us to the end here of the Ask the Experts podcast. If you stuck around till the end, thank you. I hope we were able to create some solutions here for fighter safety, at least create more awareness on the topic and then keep that conversation going, right? We don't want to see these tragedies in this sport, and we need to keep the conversation going. I want to thank all my guests: Chad Dawson, Nitin Sethi, Kevin Iole, Ryan Songalia, Alantez Fox, Seanie Monaghan, Gabe Oppenheim, and Ricky Alphonse. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, my personal handle is @Curran Bhatia, @CurranBhatia. You can also find me on YouTube under the same handle. If you want to follow the show, we are at @ATE_podcast. That's on Twitter and now on Instagram, @ATE_podcast. You can email the show at asktheexpertspod@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Let's make this sport safer. I am Curran Bhatia, signing off for Ask the Experts.
Thank you for listening to Ask the Experts with Curran Bhatia.